He was physically present in this room, clear up until everyone was made to leave. So presumably, if he was in the room at the time, they made the announcement he would be a witness to that. He was one of the last to leave, but he did leave in front of our witnesses, before our witnesses. Yes?
Senator Parent.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us. We heard from the Secretary of State's office earlier, just a couple hours ago, that they've investigated this repeatedly, that they had a monitor on site the entire time. And frankly, this has been debunked for weeks by our Secretary of State's office.
I doubt he's seen the video.
Evidence, then I think the courts will probably be able to handle this once you present your evidence to them. As I'm aware, there have been about 40 lawsuits dismissed already. And according to the law of the state of Georgia, we do not have the power to submit alternate electors. The provision in the law is quite clear at 21-501F.
Is there a question?
Senator, we'll ask questions. We'll have a time for statements at the conclusion. If we
Yeah, my question is, since this has been debunked repeatedly, what evidence can you give to us that counters what our elections officials have presented us with only an hour ago?
You just saw it. Your officials need to watch the video.
What about the fact that they say that they had a monitor there the entire time?
I can't speak for them.
Well, thank you. They did not have the video. They said they had a monitor the whole time. Be quiet.
You're
Okay.
looking at the room.
There's no Secretary of State.
Then maybe we should invite them back in.
All right. Well, we may need to do that. Senator Tillery, what number are you? Number one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Pick. I just have two questions just to try to follow through and understand this a little better. Thank you for presenting this. Push on for you.
Yeah, get a little closer to it.
Okay, is that better? Just thank you again for being here. Thank you for presenting this. I just have two questions to kind of understand it a little better. My first is, I didn't have this before, but when Senator Parent asked, it made me ask, have you been able to figure out where our monitor would have been? Or the monitor, can you point that out to us?
Yeah.
Right here. Okay. And it's easier to see from where I'm sitting, slide in the top left. Can you help me understand where, if that's where, top right is where the scanners are, where would the monitor be in that screen? I'm just trying to be able to understand it.
Yes, it's very confusing because these frames don't portray that accurately. What the witnesses said is that when they were in that roped off area I just pointed to with the press, not only could they not see a single ballot because they were so far away, they couldn't see those scanners at all. The only reason that they knew the scanners were there is because the election official, Ms. Waller, told them so. So I don't know if that means, they say it's an enormous room, that there was like a curvature to the room, but that is not a straight shot from where you see where they would have stood to the scanners because they could not see those scanners. Now, other people could, depending on where you were in the room.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a follow-up?
Yes.
The first thing is, when you do find out that information, if you don't mind getting it back to us, I know you will, and thank you for that. The second thing is just more like a chain of custody process.
Excuse me, Senator. I'm getting reports that it's difficult to hear, so you may need to get closer to the microphone. So,
I promise you I'm not doing it for these guys. I'm doing it for these guys. So as long as they can hear me, I'm good.
But a lot of people across the state want to hear what's being said.
On the second question I have, and thank you for your answer to that one. Thank you for getting us that. We'll look for the answer back from you. Just a chain of custody question now. If we could clearly see the ballots in the top right screen come out from underneath the table, I could not see that there was a cover on the front of the table until your 8:22 video. So that was very helpful. Is there anything, can you show us where other ballots were coming from? Have y'all been able to figure that out yet? Because I think if they were coming from a different place, obviously that raises even more of a specter of concern or question.
Right, so if you see, again, this is hard to understand where this would be coming from, but here. So there you have the black, I'm going to call it a suitcase, containers for ballots. You also have boxes. Those are being moved around the room throughout the day. So it appears to us they're coming from there.
From from the top corner of the bottom left screen. Is that
Correct, yeah.
okay?
And from there, they're shuffled around a lot. It gets confusing to watch this because, again, you're not looking at a linear representation of the room.
Right.
Where they're not coming from, as far as we can tell, is from under that table or any table.
Right, and it does not look like the top corner of that bottom left screen is concurrent or consecutive or any way tied into the bottom corner of the top right screen. It does not look like those are congruent. We're not seeing them come out of that corner by coming underneath that table, correct?
I don't think we can tell that from the film.
And I'm sure y'all will get more information on that as well. Thank you for helping me just understand that a little bit better. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Okay, was there another question?
And just for the record, we did not receive this video until late last night, and we were reviewing it in the middle of the night last night. So we're still reviewing it. There's still a lot more to review.
Senator Jones?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for presenting this. And that was going to be my question, Mr. Smith, was when exactly did we receive this video, or you guys get in possession of this video? And then also, so you've had no time to, when questioning the 4 people who are having a lot of movement and activity during the time frame that everyone goes home, y'all have not had time to find out who those individuals are and actually question them on anything, correct? That's correct. Okay, thank you.
Senator Rett?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Just quick refresher. When you talk with authorities involved pertaining to the situation, what was the explanation? Or have you had a chance to speak with them?
Do you mean Fulton County officials?
Yes, ma'am.
I've not spoken with them because we just got the video.
Thank you.
Okay, Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Pick, thank you for being here. Mr. Smith, thank you as well for this very important presentation. My question is simply, and if this was addressed earlier, forgive me, but who's in charge of the cameras? Who were they placed there under the Secretary of State's office or by Fulton County? And who's in charge of monitoring them, and who's in charge of securing whatever footage is there and the data?
They're operated by the State Farm Arena. The State Farm Arena.
So these were not placed there for the purposes of that facility
That's
being used to count ballots?
That's correct.
This is just regular old security cameras that
They
just
use
happen to be
these
there?
for, if you're in the arena and you have a slip and fall, or there's a fight, or something happens in the arena, these videos are, as I understand, are subpoenaed all the time.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Senator Beach, just let me get your microphone on.
Yes. Is it on?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes. I think you said there were 3 scanners, correct? Is there a way to know if those scanners were used between 10:30 and 1 a.m.? Are they tracked by time when things are scanned through them, ballots are scanned through them? Do you know?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
There have been conflicting reports about whether or not those machines keep a log in real time. They certainly should. I mean, historically, that's the standard required. But whether or not they will hand those over or kept them, I don't know.
Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, Senator Parent, one more question.
Did you mention that Chairman Pitts was there, or you spoke to him about being there during this episode?
I was not there. This is a witness affidavit that says he was there.
Okay, because-
Almost up until, he was one of the last people to leave. Not as late as the witnesses that we have, but he was there.
So he just told us he wasn't there just an hour ago.
Okay. Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
One of the witness affidavits says he's there.
Well, okay, so we heard from.
Senator Brass? No, ma'am. We need to move on. We have a lot of questions. What number are you, Senator Brass? 7?
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Pick. So the table was placed there around 8:30ish, we said, a.m.?
8:22 in the morning, approximately.
At what point, and y'all may not know this since you just got the video, at what point did the boxes of ballots go under the table?
We don't have the answer to that, so
Still
we
don't
fast forwarded through the tape several times to try to find that because we haven't had time to review it in real time, which would be 14 hours of tape to review.
Right.
So we just haven't had time to look at that.
Understood. Do we know about how many ballots would go in each one of those suitcases?
So we have a witness who says that inside the suitcases, she estimates that about 6,000 ballots can fit in there.
And there were how many that were taken out?
We don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Gooch?
Maybe a question for Senator Parent. I heard you say several times this has been debunked, but I also just heard that this video just appeared last night. So how could it have been debunked?
Well, my response, not being an expert, is that these very allegations came up right away after the election, almost a month ago, and have been repeatedly discussed by the Secretary of State's office, including everything that we're seeing here.
But is this
And
not
there have
the-
been explanations for all of it.
Is this not the first time
Well-
this video has been shown?
I believe that this is the
Yes.
first time this video has been
Yes.
seen.
And
It
the-
is.
And
That's
the news
correct.
media hasn't seen this video or have not?
They have
put it
not.
out? They have not.
Because
put
I've
it
been
out.
in contact with counsel for the State Farm Arena, and
Will be today.
Okay, Senator Anderson, you're on number 7, correct?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for being here today. My question is, if they said that they were going to shut down and no more counting, does the election system shut down to where it can't count no more, or can it keep on counting?
Well, so I referenced the statute, which shows that the Georgia elections must be conducted in public view. That means the press can watch. That means the other party can watch. Both parties are represented to be observers or monitors, whatever. Here, they were made to leave, so it was done in contravention of the statute.
But my question is the equipment, the counting system, does it supposed to shut down when nobody's supposed to be counting?
I'll defer to Ray on that.
I do not know the answer to that question.
It has to be secured if they're going to leave the premises, for sure.
That's leading to what is it actually securing the count, even though they say that we're not going to count?
There's not supposed to be activity with election workers if there's not public view. That's the law in Georgia.
And the ballots have to be secured at all times.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, I think we may need to, do you have anything else that you'd want to point out about the video?
I think that's everything, Ray?
Okay.
That's everything for now, yes.
Okay.
All right.
Thank
Well,
you. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. I think we had, was it a Russell Ramsland that we wanted to, Mayor, that's right, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of the committee, thank you very much for giving us this hearing. I represent President Trump along with Jenna Ellis, and this is our 4th or 5th hearing, so I really appreciate the opportunity to get these facts out. We've had some difficulty getting a hearing, but I appreciate it very, very much, and I want to congratulate our local council on doing such a fine job for us here in Georgia. This is just only the tip of the iceberg of all the good work that he's done. I'm going to present 2 witnesses to you who are in the nature of expert witnesses who have testified in cases like this at times in the past. One of them, Mr. Ramsland, is going to be on Zoom. And he's basically going to show that in 2016, you had only 199,356 mail-in votes. This time you had 1.3 million. 2016, you had a 6.4% rejection rate, and this time you had a 0.2% rejection rate. In other words, 0.2. So when you had 200,000 ballots, you had a rejection rate of 6.4%, and now where you have 1.3 million ballots, you have almost no rejection rate. 0.2% is almost statistically insignificant. That alone raises suspicion of fraud and has been held as such in election cases. And Biden won the mail-in vote by over 400,000. Mr. Ramsland will also go through the Dominion machine, the Hart machine, and how that compared to the other machines that you used throughout the state. And he will also show you some very, very I guess he would describe it as indicia of fraud. You had 96,600 mail-in ballots that were voted, yet the county records show they would never receive back. Be a little clearer. Altogether, you had 231,188 ballots with no return record at all. You were able to cancel 134,000 of those, but you kept 96,600 votes when there was no return record for them. What would that suggest? Phantom votes. There's no return record, yet it's counted. That pattern has appeared in other states that were involved in massive fraud. I might say that a good deal of what I see here is very similar to what happened at approximately that time in Pennsylvania. In Michigan, at about 4 o'clock in the morning, people had been cleared out around 1 in the morning, been told there'd be no more counting. All the Republicans left. 2 remained behind accidentally, and a Dominion employee. And all of a sudden, they saw 2 big trucks come in the back. They thought they were food trucks, and they were very hungry, so they ran to the food trucks. Well, there wasn't food, there were ballots coming out. Thousands and thousands of ballots in paper bags, in garbage cans, in cardboard boxes, and then they were put on a table and they were counted for the next 3 hours. And there were 3 witnesses under oath to that, and they say that they were counted, and as they could listen, they never heard one time that there was a vote for Trump. All the votes were for Biden. And they estimate somewhere between 50 and 100,000 votes entered at that time. There's similar evidence in Pennsylvania and also something similar in Arizona at around this time. Second witness will be Colonel Phil Colson. Colonel Colson has had the opportunity to forensically examine the Dominion machine that actually began to cause the problem for Dominion. That was the machine that was found in Michigan's Antrim County that had recorded mistakenly 6,000 votes for Biden when the votes actually were cast for Trump. And he can give you an analysis of the problems with the Dominion machine, and also just a piece of advice. You've got a very big election coming up. I think you'd be very ill-advised to use that company or their machines. When you test their record over the last 12 to 15 years, I think you'll find they're one of the more insecure companies in this business. So let me first see if I can get Mr. Ramsland on the Zoom.
Mr. Ramsland will be via Zoom.
There he is.
There he is.
How are you, sir?
I'm
So
fine.
you are speaking to a committee of the Georgia legislature, and just tell us your name, please.
Russell Ramsland.
And you're a resident of Dallas, Texas, is that right?
I am. In fact, I'm in Dallas, Texas right now.
And you just give us your credentials, briefly. I know they're very long, so give us the best ones.
I run basically a security operation. We do cybersecurity as well as personal security.
I know.
We have a number of ex-3-letter agency intel people that work for us in the cyber side. We have ex-military people that work for us in the cyber side. We have a fairly robust cyber capability in both protecting as well as trying to penetrate people's network to help them better protect.
And you hold an MBA from Harvard University, a political science degree from Duke, and you've worked for NASA and for MIT. Is that correct?
Well, I have worked with NASA and with MIT. That is correct. Coming from West Texas, I don't always tell people about Harvard. They're a little worried about Harvard there.
Okay. So if we could go to page, just so that we can do this quickly, Mr. Randley, if we go to page 10 of your affidavit, where you describe the comparison of the Dominion and Hart machines in comparison to the other machines used in Georgia. What did you find when you did that comparison?
We were concerned because we had seen some audit logs in Dallas in 2018. So this really started for us long before this election. And we started actually with ES&S, but we eventually got into Dominion because we saw many of the same problems with Dominion in elections that we saw with ES&S. So the first thing we wanted to do was to see what the effect was of a Dominion machine compared to one other. And we looked at it, or excuse me, compared to a group of others, and we looked at it from 3 points of view. And the first thing we did is we tried to go through the 2017 census demographics. We got the 2020 vote count by county for the country. And then we also got the Election Assistance Committee voting machine information, so we knew what each county had. And you would normally assume that once you do the correlation between turnout and voters and counties, et cetera, and how they voted in the previous election, you get a pretty good mathematical model as to what you should expect to see in a Biden versus Trump by county vote. And then we went and tested that. And sure enough, we found that the model was pretty darn accurate, other than a few extreme outliers that we do want to now go back and look at in more detail. But the point is, we could see on a percentage basis whether Biden, for instance, outperformed by a certain percentage or underperformed by a certain percentage, what you would expect in a county. And normally you would expect that overperformance and underperformance to about zero out. Well, in this case, what we noticed is when we went back and looked at it, instead of all voting equipment all over the country, and we simply segmented out Dominion, we found out that Biden outperformed what he should have by about 5% across the board. It was actually amazing. No other, we did not see that result in most other cases. So then we said, well, you know, this is the election system. We got to make sure this is right. So we went back and we looked at it instead of percentage outperformance or underperformance. We looked at it by counties. And when we did it by counties, we found an even more startling result. We found out that if Dominion counts your votes, Mr. Biden got about 78% of the wins. And if you used all other voting machines, then you only got about a 46%. So we noticed right away, again, a second marker that with Dominion, he significantly outperformed any other voting system. And then we did what was called a chi-squared analysis. And I won't bore the committee with what that is. It's a regression of sorts. And it allows you to sort data into various boxes. And what we did is we wanted to find out, using this analysis, whether or not, again, Dominion outperformed the others. And it was very interesting because, once again, we came up with about the same number and we got about the same answer. And this analysis said that you get about a 5.5% bump compared to all other voting equipment as compared to Dominion compared to others. And when you apply that to the actual vote, then you find out that we're talking a fairly serious number of votes doing Dominion versus others. I think I jotted the number down here. Yeah. We found, using our first analysis, that about 123,000 votes in Georgia would have been entirely outside the realm of what you would have expected had another voting system been used. And if you use the chi-squared analysis, you got to about 136,000. So either way, it was a very significant number of votes. We did note that you had 199,356 mail-ins in 2016 with a 6.4% rejection rate. And then in 2020, you had 1,320,154 with a 0.2 rejection rate. So that got us looking then at the mail-in ballots. And we had already done an analysis in Dallas this voting cycle and had found that after the county posted registered votes, and they do that by posting the voter record, so you can see a lot of data. You can see the name, the address, the date someone asked for a mail-in, the date they were mailed that mail-in, and the date it was returned. And what we found is that in early voting, over 57,000 votes were tampered with after the county had first recorded them as being voted. So we went and we did the same kind of look at in Georgia. And what we found was very interesting because we found over 200,000 mail-in ballots that when we looked at the voter record had supposedly never been returned. And yet they were voted. Now, about half of those ultimately got purged, but about 96,000 of those were never marked returned, and yet they were voted. And we have seen that in other areas of the country because it's very easy in the Dominion system to assign a person to a mail-in ballot inside the system itself.
Sir,
that's one possible
sir,
explanation.
May I just interrupt with one question? To assign it that way would, of course, be fraudulent, wouldn't it?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have no idea. You just have a ballot in the adjudication file, for instance, and you decide to vote it, and you assign it to a voter.
How many times, approximately, did you
Well,
find?
there were about 96,000 of those that we found in, I think the exact, 96,600 was the exact number of mail-in ballots that were voted but were never actually shown as received back by the county.
Well, I think, is there anything else you would like to point out? I think that's pretty complete.
I think that's pretty much got it.
So there's 96,600 votes that were counted, never received, and assigned somewhere, and these
Yes.
would have to be considered illegal votes, wouldn't they?
Right. And by the way, I would say this was not just mere oversight by one or two counties because we saw this pretty much across the board. And so this was an across the board problem. And we also saw a couple other interesting things. We noticed that sometimes the ballot was actually shown as being voted before it was received back. There was a receive back date, but it was voted before the county received it back.
How could that be possible?
Well, you'll have to explain that one to me too, because it's not supposed to be that way.
Okay.
We also saw a situation where ballots were voted the exact same day that they were mailed out. So they were mailed out, mailed in. Somehow they managed to make the round trip on the exact same day. We saw it happen just one day after, so that you mail it on a Tuesday and Wednesday afternoon in the mail, you got the ballot back. We just saw a lot of these kinds of problems with the mail-in ballot. But it was the 96,000 that were never received back that really jumped out at us in a big way.
And what was the difference in the margin between President Trump and Joe Biden on mail-in votes?
I don't actually have that number handy. I'm sorry.
Well, if I told you 399,000, would that sound about right?
That's probably in the ballpark.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any questions, Mr. Ramsland? Okay, thank you, sir, for your participation today. All right, we'll.
The second person I'm going to ask to speak is Phil Coulson.
Yes, sir.
Phil, you're here. Are you not?
He's right behind you.
Right behind me, okay. Would you like to sit or stand?
Mr. Coulson,
Why don't you stand and I'll sit?
if you would tell us, give us your full name and tell us where you live and tell us a little bit about yourself, and then let us know what you want us to hear.
My name is Phil Waldron. I live in Texas, close to Mr. Ramsland, out in Dripping Springs. So, my background is Army information operations, the intersection of computer network operations, electronic warfare, psychological operations, deception, and OPSEC. And my point of view of looking at these systems is how to penetrate them, how to corrupt them, how to manipulate them to conduct strategic influence operations. And in my opinion, this is the American people are under a pretty significant information warfare campaign that's multifaceted. And we've looked at the Dominion system. We've looked at the history of these electronic voting companies, and they're all pretty well related. They're connected by a common DNA, which is their software code. So this all started back with Smartmatic. It was designed basically to keep Hugo Chavez in power in Venezuela. He invested, I believe, 28% of the funds to stand the company up. And I personally debriefed the son of a Cuban intelligence officer who firsthand knowledge two of Hugo Chavez's family members when Maduro was faced by a populist uprising after Hugo Chavez had died. Two of Hugo Chavez's family members said, "Don't worry, it's guaranteed. Our father invested the money into Smartmatic so that Maduro is going to win." So I guess to connect all the dots, Dominion Voting Equipment acquired a company called Sequoia Voting Systems, which was spun off of SGO Smartmatic. And they also acquired the Premier system, which came from the Diebold election company, which also used Smartmatic software. ES&S software, which Mr. Ramsland mentioned, has a license agreement with Smartmatic, and so does Dominion. They all feed information to Clarity Elections, which is owned by a company called Scytl, SCYTL, which is headquartered in Madrid, Spain. They also have U.S. elections. Our team's recently uncovered, just doing basic investigative work on the dark web, but we have an affidavit to this effect that Smartmatic and Dominion do share a physical business address in Barbados at the same building, the same street address. So there are commonality in business links, licensing agreements, as well as the software code and the functionality. We began really looking at these as looking at the operator's manuals for these software systems, and just like President Chavez designed them for, they're designed to control and manipulate votes, and that's what we found reviewing these things.
Okay. Are there any questions? Yes, sir.
So, have you had an occasion to examine one of these Dominion machines?
Yes, sir. We did up in northern Michigan. Our team conducted forensics analysis on Central Lake Township Precinct in Antrim, Michigan on the 27th of November.
And would you consider it to be a very insecure machine that can be accessed very easily?
Correct. These machines have been shown at DEF CON and hacking contest, and actually elementary school students to DEF CON guys can get in under 2 minutes. The elementary school kids can get in about 7 minutes to hack into the machines and take over their operating system.
This is contrary to the public statements that Dominion has made about their security. Isn't that correct?
There are about 12 different attack vectors or ways you can get into these systems. Everything from the server level to download CSV files, make changes to them, and re-upload them at the server level, to basically in the operating system of these machines. And what we found in Antrim, Michigan, is everybody's got thumb drives. But until you put one in your computer, you really don't know what's on there. That's a common vulnerability. And actually in the military, in our classified equipment systems, all of the USB ports are disabled because of the huge vulnerability represented by USB drives. So when the Antrim County, actually it was the township of Central Lake, they had finished their voting on the 3rd, stored all their ballots according to the policy and all of their chain of custody documents for the software. They got called back to do a rerun on November the 6th using the same voting data card, using the same encryption or the encryption software, but a different USB drive to run the totals. Their totals were significantly different, even in down ballot races. Presidential race, I think, was only different by a couple of 3 votes. And it was, again, a very, very small sample size. But school board elections, state propositions for spending, and marijuana bills changed the outcome of the vote in the rerun from November the 3rd to November the 6th. And again, this was one small precinct with a total of 1,494 votes. And basically what this does is put this system outside of the specificity limitations set forth in the federal election laws, that you're basically only allowed 1 out of 250,000 votes or ballots to have an error. And the error rate was far exceeded the allowable standard for this software.
Have you had an opportunity to examine any of other Dominion machines?
No, but we'd like to. The company stalls pretty much at every opportunity. They've included in their contracts, and I'm sure that it's the same in Georgia, that they want to control your votes, and they want to ensure that you can't inspect their software or how your votes are voted, where they're sent, and how they're stored. As a matter of fact, we just left Michigan early this morning and were testifying before the House last night in Oakland County. If you actually click on their county election supervisor, you click on the 2020 election results, a warning flag pops up and it says you're exiting this site and you're going to Clarity Elections. So Clarity Elections is a subsidiary of Seidel, which provides the early voting logs to TVs, New York Times, all the mainstream media. Those votes from Oakland County, which was one of the biggest counties in Michigan, they're actually controlled, maintained, and owned by Clarity Elections. And it pops up on the website. We're going to take you to www.clarity.elections, and you can look that up on your computers if you'd like to.
So I would think this would come as quite a surprise to the people of Georgia or Michigan, or that their voting data is sent outside the United States, and also that their vote is being counted by a foreign company. Isn't that correct?
Clarity Elections is owned by Seidel, which is headquartered in Barcelona, Spain. And again, these companies have servers all over the world, and we came to the identity of, or saw the packet transfer to the server in Frankfurt. That was reported on the 8th, and then on the 9th, that server went offline. So we know from German cybersecurity professors that talked about the increase in the drastic increase in their traffic on November the 3rd and 4th. And he attributed the increase in traffic, in web traffic, to the American elections. So it was common knowledge that that server was processing a lot of American election data.
And one last question: Could you describe fractional voting?
So if all of us in this room, had one vote for one candidate, we would have the sum of the votes in this room. When the votes are reported to from Dominion to the media, they're reported in fractional numbers, 3 digits. So when you add whole numbers together, you can't get a fraction. When you calculate or have a formula or an algorithm to assign points to votes, then you get a fraction. So our voting results are reported in fractional values, not in whole numbers.
All right, Senator Beach?
Yes, thank you, Colonel Walden, for your testimony. I voted on Election Day.
Senator, you need to speak into the microphone because otherwise you're going
Yes.
to be picked up.
I vote, Colonel Waldron, thank you for your testimony. I voted on Election Day, and I got a paper ballot. I scanned it, and on the scanner, it said I was number 78 at 9:05. So my question to you is, Ms. Pick was telling us in that video there were 3 scanners at the State Farm Arena. Is there a drive tape or a flash drive in a scanner that we could know if votes were counted between 10:30 and 1 a.m. on those 3 machines at State Farm Arena? Because my ballot told me I was cast at 9:05 and I was number 78 on the machine I scanned it in. So should we be able to have some data from those 3 scanners?
So those ballots, the paper is actually scanned into a ballot image, and the ballot image is actually what is counted for the vote. So each one of those machines do have logs, and they will transmit to a reporting upload time. It's my understanding, I believe Tuesday though, that the Fulton County machines were wiped. I heard a report of that. I don't know that. There are forensic artifacts that can be pulled off those machines, but really the place you would get that is under the U.S. Code. I believe it's Title 46. All federal election documents, whether they're paper or electronic, have to be maintained for 22 months. So if there is an archive, those ballot images will tell you the date timestamp on those, but someone would have to get a forensic access to that data and those machines, the tapes, and the servers.
And was Ms. Pick correct in saying there could be about 3,000 an hour scanned in a machine? So it could be about 18,000 votes? Is that correct?
That's the technical specifications of those machines are, depending on their jam rate, between 2,000 and 3,000 an hour. If they're operating great with a seasoned operator that knows what they're doing, they can probably get up to the manufacturer specification, which would be 3,000 votes per hour.
Thank you.
Senator Parent.
Mr. Chairman, first, really brief comment, and I do have a question. Some of what you said, portions of it, remind me of some of what we heard in testimony in various committees in 2019 when we were considering buying this new system, actually. We did hear from a lot of election security experts, computer scientists, and I don't know if you're aware, but Democrats argued repeatedly and strongly against buying these due to their complexity, cost, and potential lapses in security.
That's correct.
But my question is, you're aware, of course, that there was a hand recount using the human readable text that also held Biden out as the victor of this election. Do you have a comment on that? Do you have an opinion on the risk limiting audit done on every ballot using the human readable text versus the barcode?
Yes, ma'am. If there was a 100% audit on actual ballots, which if that was done, that's awesome. The risk limiting audit, I believe, is a very small sample of those ballots. So
normally, yes, but
yeah.
This one.
So if the evidence that was presented this morning at the videos, if additional ballots were pulled in, then that's what you're going to count. You're going to count the ballots that have been injected into the process. And this is something, again, that we've seen in Pennsylvania and Arizona and Michigan and a couple other states that we're currently working on, is that there is there are huge breaches in chain of custody of the ballots, of the USB drives that run these systems. So yes, ma'am, that risk limiting audit could have been conducted 100% and shows the readouts. There are ways to detect fraudulent paper ballots. We can image those to detect machine printed ink spots. We can detect if they were folded. We can detect if they were marked by hand. There's about 29 different point signatures when you pick up a pen and you fill in a ballot, a machine-printed ballot, a mass-produced ballot, which we have affidavits in Pennsylvania and Arizona that these machine-printed ballots were injected into the system. So until you did a full forensic audit, you would not be able to tell which ballots were actually filled out by Georgia citizens or which ballots were printed by machine and fraudulently injected into the voting process.
Senator Jones?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick question. I know when the Secretary of State was shopping for when we had to upgrade our voting system, I think we had 3 different vendors who came before us, and they settled on the Dominion Group, and they're used now in all 159 counties that we have here in Georgia. How many other states use this system? Do you know the answer to that? And what's been the feedback with other states?
Generally, there's a mix. So, for example, in Arizona, it's only Maricopa County. In Michigan, it's swapped up. In Pennsylvania, it was pretty much Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, I think, used ES&S. But the functionality and the systems are very, very similar between ES&S and Dominion as far as our research goes. So what Mr. Ramsland presented earlier that showed about a 5.5 point differential when you just isolate Dominion machines across the country, that's kind of the working theory that we were working off of.
Follow-up question, Mr. Chairman. So I saw some looks on people's faces, even with their mask on, when you were talking about the fractional adding of votes. Maybe you can go over that one more time because it gave me pause when I first heard it as well. So maybe you can help me with that. And is that just with the Dominion program that you've seen, or you've seen
that appears to be the live feed from Dominion and Clarity. So all of those reporting, the fractional voting is there. It's not a whole number. Again, if there are 10 people, you cast 10 ballots. The sum of the whatever candidates are voted for should equal 10, and not 2.87 for one, 3.13 for the other, and 4 for the third candidate. It should all, equal whole numbers, and that's not what's represented.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Jordan? Let me see, let me get your, what number are you on? 7.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have some follow-up questions because I'm a little bit confused.
Yes, ma'am.
Senator Parent indicated that or asked you about the fact that there, in terms of the risk limiting audit, that there had been a hand examination of every single machine cast ballot that resulted in virtually an identical outcome as the scanned vote. And I'll represent to you that it was 100% recount, that normally risk limiting audits obviously are a small portion, but here it was an actual recount of all ballots. So I just want to make sure that we're on the same page with respect to that.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and so after she said that, though, you went on to say something about, however, what we saw in the video about the ballots injected into the process. So are you trying to say that in the video what you saw were ballots that were somehow not lawful, that weren't real, that weren't actually cast by registered voters in the state of Georgia?
We do have affidavits of people who trucked in ballots from out of state into other states, and that
and to be clear, into Georgia, because I heard
not into Georgia. No.
That's right. I heard a lot about Michigan too, and a lot about not North Carolina, which is part of the problem, but a lot about Michigan, a lot about Arizona, a lot about these other states, which some use some of the same systems, some don't. And as you know, state to state, the election laws and processes are very different, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
And even from county to county, under the same law, the execution and chain of custody procedures appear to be a lot different.
It can be. We're trying to make sure that they're as
Yes, ma'am.
streamlined and, as possible. Obviously, that's hard. So your opinion is based on the fact that there are affidavits of other people from other states who have alleged that they've trucked in ballots to other states, and so then your testimony is saying that, ergo, these ballots in this video must have been trucked in from other states and are unlawful? Is that the conclusion?
No, ma'am. I said that a full forensic audit would determine that. And forensically auditing the paper, the ink, and the ink signatures with optical imaging devices would be able to tell you if there were any ballots that were not legitimate ballots that were injected into the process.
And so then my question is, if these were extras that were just trucked in, right? Somebody just brought them in. Then you would expect then that the number of ballots would exceed the number of registered voters who had requested absentee ballots and or who had voted in person, correct?
Underneath within the margin of error, we've seen, again, I haven't seen in Georgia, so I can't testify to that, but we've seen in other places where ballots were segregated, separated, and discarded or not counted, and then other ballots were injected, and those were by affidavits that have been acquired by all the legal teams.
And so, for example, in Georgia, you
Senator
don't know,
Jordan,
just one more.
I was going to say,
One more,
just
Mr.
one more
Chairman.
question.
So sitting here, you don't know that the fact that the number of ballots cast actually matched the number of registered voters that requested absentee ballots and then cast the absentee ballots and or appeared in person to cast ballots, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Senator Tillery, did you have a question? Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Clarifying that?
Yes, sir.
Colonel, when you see those ballots being taken out from under the desk, aren't there 96,600 ballots that were voted, but for which there's no return? Could they possibly be those ballots?
There is a possibility.
Or could that be a reasonable explanation for these unexplained ballots?
It could be one explanation, yes, sir.
And what about to go further back in Mr. Ramsland's analysis, expert opinion, he says there are 136,098 votes that have the indicia of fraud. They're in serious question based on the analysis that he did of the Dominion machines. Could it have something to do with that?
The machine vote is highly suspect. I think if I recall correctly, the timeline, the upload of votes.
Yes, I was going to ask you that.
0336 in the morning, that of the 4th. Georgia had the largest single ballot upload, and it was from multiple centers, but it was a 200,000 ballot upload. And at 0336.
What time was that?
0336
Did that
on the
include
4th.
Fulton County?
That was across multiple precincts across the state.
Mr.
Thank
Chair,
you.
I just have one really quick follow-up, one just real quick.
One, but I have other senators that have questions.
I know, but one of the issues with respect to Mr. Ramsland that I want to, is that there was an indication that, are you aware of the fact that in the system, in our voting system, that when you vote early, it indicates that you have cast an absentee ballot? So, for example, it will say absentee ballot requested, let's say October 6th, and then it'll say received October 6th, but it says absentee. Are you aware of that?
That would be a question for Mr. Ramsland, I'm sorry.
Okay, and so could that explain some of these purported votes that he was talking about in terms of they were absentees the day, they were received the day of and then voted the same day? Or
So
requested
if
and
they're
then voted?
in Georgia, if there's a difference in absentee ballots versus mail-in ballots, then there is a difference. If the early votes were recorded as absentee ballots, I believe what I heard Mr. Ramsland say that those were mail-in ballots. So if there's a distinction between absentee and mail-in in the state of Georgia, that would be a question for your election officials as far as how they tabulate or account for early voting statistics on the Secretary of State's website.
Senator Tillery.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the mayor asked the question about the 96,600 votes that I was going to ask a lot more eloquently than I could. So thank you, Mr. Mayor. But I do have two follow-up questions on that. When you mentioned, it sounds like if we have done a full audit of the paper counts, 100%, not just a small percentage of audit, that may negate some of your concerns about the Dominion machines, but you then said we might need to audit the paper for what the 200-ish thousand or so that may have come in. Did I hear you correctly on that?
Again, there are so many ways. So I look at life as how to attack it. That's what I did in the military. How do I attack it? How do I defeat it? How do I interdict it? And if we looked at those, you can, we've heard testimony, and again, I'm not sure about Georgia on the processing, but I did hear it in Pennsylvania, I did hear it in Arizona, that mail-in ballots were opened by the time they got to the processor. There were ballots separated from the envelope. The signature verification was non-standard on the
I don't
envelope.
mean to cut you off. I'm doing it just for time purposes.
Yes.
I apologize. But I thought you said something about ink and where folds were and marks on the paper.
Correct.
My question goes to that. With the Dominion system and our ballot marking device, would that put marks in the same place that would cause some issue with auditing the way you suggested, possibly on marks on the paper?
No, the hand-marked features of a ballot are forensically, it's just like, when your DPS, your state troopers do ballistics on a bullet. Every ballot has a unique marking parameter that can be picked up by optical sensors to differentiate it from machine printing. Even if they, try to smudge a machine print on a printer, a hand-marked ballot is different than a machine-marked ballot, and that can be picked up and with a reprogrammed scanner.
One final question for you, Mr. Chairman. I do not know if you've been able to look at Georgia's numbers specifically yet, but I'm wondering, did you see fractional numbers in Georgia?
I did not look, I just looked at the aggregate roll-ups, so I did not, Mr. Ramsland and several other members of the team did
That'd be a question
the
we
work
should
on
ask him.
Georgia, correct?
Thank you.
Okay, I think Senator Rett had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to welcome you all to Georgia, and particularly the Honorable Mayor. I'm a retired veteran, and I lived in New York under your tenure as mayor, in particular under 9/11, and I want to give you kudos for a great job. But I have a quick question. From a financial and logistical standpoint, it won't be feasible to change out the Dominion system before the January 5th runoff. So if you had a chance to talk to the voters of Georgia, what would you say to them in terms of encouragement moving forward using this system? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
I would say there are controls that can be put into place for every machine. If there is absolute positive control of the software and the tapes, you basically put the software in position in the machines. You run a standard ballot, 200 ballots for one candidate and 200 ballots for the other candidate. Get the tapes out and make sure that they run right, and then you pretty much have a guard on that machine so that nobody touches the USB drives or the soft drives, and then every precinct can have a hard copy tape, and that can be manually added up.
Okay. Thank you. I don't think there are any further. Senator Harper, did you have a question?
Mr. Chairman,
What number is it?
This is number 10.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to just a point of clarification to Senator Jordan's point about absentee ballots. I just pulled up my, I voted early and in person, and I think we do, although it says absentee, it specifically says absentee early in-vote. Early in-person voting is the way it is specifically listed, and if you go to the Secretary of State's website, it also separates those absentee by mail, absentee by advance, or advance in-person voting. I just wanted to make sure that there was a clarification that there is a distinction in our system of by mail absentee, early in-person voting by absentee.
Thank you, Senator Harper. So, Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did I understand you tell us that someone at your level could hack into the machine in 2 minutes?
A hacker, yes, sir. DEF CON, which is a big conference, they have all the white hat and black hat hackers out in Las Vegas every year. But that's not me.
Okay. If we could find, if someone can hack in it in 2 minutes, can we find out who did it?
Sir, if there was a full forensic audit, then yes. But for anyone to hack into the machines as they sit without the proper authorization would be illegal.
Okay.
It'd be illegal for me to do it without the proper authorization or our teams.
I see. All right, and then my follow-up question, the 96,000 votes that the mayor's talking about, could they been, in this situation we in, could they been come in from out of state?
The capability exists, the possibility exists for them to be printed. We had voice recordings of an order being placed in China to print ballots. They were given the basic ballots, and they were, again, that's outside of the U.S. and outside really of our purview, but there are indications that there were fake ballots printed up and pre-positioned in places for injection into the voting systems.
In Georgia?
No, sir, not that I know of in Georgia, in the U.S. presidential election.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right, Senator Cardin. Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor, go ahead.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Colonel. I would just like to finish up with 2 points. First of all, Representative Jordan, you said that the Democrats here objected to Dominion. I should tell you that the best letter written on Dominion is written by my Congresswoman, Carolyn Maloney, who is a Democrat. And I really would suggest reading it. It's prophetic. She wrote it in 2006, and she basically outlined the history of Dominion and Smartmatic, the connection to Hugo Chavez. Eventually, she followed up with Maduro, and how it's a highly inaccurate machine. And I guess this is just a question. I don't know why that isn't discovered in due diligence. And whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, this is not a machine you want counting your votes. Second, on the so I don't consider that a part of an issue at all. But it does cast doubt on the entire legitimacy of the vote. And the fact that you have the power to do this, state law doesn't in any way prevent you, the legislature, from immediately taking this over and deciding this. That power, right, obligation is given to you by the Founding Fathers, deliberately. The Founding Fathers felt in a situation, I can't imagine they thought of this one, but in a situation of complexity, the best place to decide would be with the institution closest to the people. And you're the institution closest to the people. And you're going to have a very, very much better legal mind than mine talk to you on this, Professor Eastman. My professor in law school was Eastman. This is Professor Eastman. And it's very, very clear. The Supreme Court in McPherson versus Blacker says whatever provisions may be made by statute or by the state constitution to choose electors by the people, there is no doubt of the right of the legislature to resume the power at any time. to be sure, at any time, would likely not allow the legislatures to pick its own set of electors by whim, but there would have to be a substantial basis for it. And that's really what we're presenting to you, a substantial basis, even to the point that these votes are too illegitimate to certify. Either too illegitimate to certify, or you can look through them and certify them in whatever way you feel is right. But this is your power, your obligation, and I know it's surprising. I've been before state legislators who didn't realize it, and really, so do we really have this power? And then once reading the Constitution and the Federalist Papers, it clearly is yours. You are the final arbiter of who the electors should be and whether the process is fair or not. And the other way to look at it, it's your responsibility if a false and fraudulent count is submitted to the United States government. And it is clear that the count you have right now is false.
Thank you. All right. I think we're going to move on to the next witness. Mr. Smith, did you want to say something else, or did you have?
Well, we do have a couple of other witnesses.
Okay. Susan Voiles?
Yes, Susan
Okay.
Voiles. She's going to bring her in.
I'm sorry. Just answer my question. Yep.
Okay. She's coming.
There she is. Ms. Voiles, would you?
Right here.
Right there. She's right there.
Right here.
Oh, there you are.
I'll take a cup.
Are you ready?
I'm ready. Go ahead.
All right. Would you state your name and where you live, Ms. Voiles?
My name is Susan Voiles, and most people call me Susie.
Okay.
I live in Sandy Springs, Georgia, which is in Fulton County.
Okay. And tell me about your being a poll manager and what you've done.
Mr. Smith, I'm going to need for you to. I know she's behind you, but I'm going to need for you to speak into the microphone so that you can be heard online. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you may want to start over.
Okay. Ms. Voiles, if you could tell the committee here what your role is as a precinct poll manager and how long you've been doing it, and then kind of get into how you were involved with the recount, et cetera.
I'd be happy to.
Okay.
I have been a manager of a precinct polling location in Sandy Springs for over 20 years. I've mostly been in the same location. When they consolidated polls, however, they asked me to move to another poll. Then when they pared them down, I got to go to SSO2 again, which I thought was a wonderful thing. Anyway, I have never experienced in all my time an election quite like this one. I have never seen such poor handling of not only the machinery, but the chain of custody from the very beginning was so flawed. I went in on Sunday, and that's the typical day that we pick up our things. And all our equipment, our big BMDs, the ballot marking device, is supposed to be put in place.
Could you tell what date that was, please?
Yes, that would have been Sunday, the 1st of November. It's always the Sunday prior. And that Friday prior to that, our ballot marking devices are all supposed to be in the location of our poll. up to that point, I had no idea that mine were not there. But when I went in on Sunday, I'm to pick up my poll pads, a lot of material, and the poll pads are really an updated version of the numbered list of voters. It's just on an iPad-like device. And it also has a place where I can encode the cards for the voters, the voter access cards. But when I went in, the only thing I received was my telephone. And he's...
Ms. Foils, I'm sorry. Could you, we've got limited time. Why don't we skip ahead to when you were involved with the recount on November 14th?
I'd be happy to.
Okay.
On Saturday, well, I was called the day before on the 13th. Friday the 13th, I was called and asked, could I obtain two of my assistant managers, and would I be willing to go down to perform the audit? I said, yes, I would. Unfortunately, we had to sign up for the entire 5 days, Saturday through Wednesday, and from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day. If we could not commit to that time, they did not want our services. So I could, but my other assistant managers could not. I did go down with another manager, and our first box that we finally got close to 10 o'clock in the morning, I believe it was 9:45, because they didn't have enough tables for everybody. They weren't prepared for as many as they asked to come. Our first box that we got was a corrugated cardboard box that was not the size of a typical file box, but it was just like maybe a book box if you were moving. It was bound together with packaging tape, and on the top of that, clear packaging tape, on the top of that was the seal that should be totally pressed down like a sticker from the Secretary of State's office, which should, according to the chain of custody, have the signatures of those who had prepared this box, who had been the last to touch it. Likewise, at the end, that would have been my responsibility once we had gone through the contents to do the same thing, replace it with a new seal with my signature and my partner's signature. We were instructed how we were to do the ballots, and our first batch, our first box, contained 8 batches of at least 100 apiece. One batch did have 110 in it. And as we went through the batches, they were normal absentee ballots, and most of them were pretty worn until we came up to a batch that is, my words were pristine. It was white. It was so white. And this is a typical absentee ballot. You can see how when it comes to you in the mail, how it's got many folds in it. These had no folds. You could see where it should have been folded if it went through a folding machine, or for the voter to figure out easily how to do that. But these did not have that. I was running my hands up, and I said to my seatmate, I said, feel these. They feel different. And when you have felt absentee ballots for as long as I have, yeah, the years are creeping up there, you know the feel of them. You know the feel of a real dollar bill. You know the feel of a play dollar bill, even though it might look genuine. But the thing that really jumped out at us, besides the feel of these ballots, besides there were no folds, was the fact that the first one that was bubbled in had almost a little eclipse of white in the bubble where you would bubble in. And in that ballot, everything else was right there. But as we began to proceed through, because we had to sort these by Donald J. Trump, Joseph R. Biden, and Joe Jorgensen, and then write-in if we happened to have a write-in. What we began to notice was an overwhelming amount were exactly, not possibly, but exactly the same. So these absentee ballots had no folds in them. Yet they were presented as absentee ballots. Even if they'd wound up as a provisional ballot, which is similar in structure, just different type of envelopes, it would have been exactly the same. there would have been folds in them, but these ballots were exactly the same, and there was one in the middle of this stack that all of us at times have pulled something out of a scanner or a copier too soon, and the image is not square on the paper. And that's exactly the way one of these ballots was in this batch. It was also striking to me that rather than having the customary 100 to the batch, it had 110. We found this to be quite an oddity.
Talk about the when you were down there about the organization. Oh, I'm sorry. Talk about the organization when you were down there and you came down there and on that, I think it was a Sunday morning, you came down there and you thought you were going to be down there all day and they told you to leave.
On the second day, we stayed until about 4:45 on Saturday. We were instructed to come back Sunday morning, which we did. We were very surprised to find no lines. What they had done was not only had poll managers there, Fulton County poll managers, but the previous day had had a number of Fulton County employees who were there. Also, the girls behind us, they were librarians, but they were Fulton County librarians. They were there to do this. So on Sunday morning when we went down, it was fairly void of anybody. We were just very surprised. We were instructed to go to our table that we had had the day before. People came in after us, including the people at the table behind us. We gave our table number so that we could get our ballots. We waited and we waited. The people behind us got theirs. They had over 3,000 from Sandy Springs precincts. The people in front of us had over 6,000 from another precinct. And when our box came, and our eyes were getting kind of big because that was a lot of ballots to get through. When we got ours, we opened up our box, and the Fulton County ballot boxes are like heavy-duty suitcases with padding on the inside and roller carts. We had the young man unseal ours, and then when we opened it, I was kind of aghast. We had one batch of the machine-generated ballots in there from the BMDs, the ballot marking device. There were 60 of them in that batch. They were all from a Quality Living Center, which is in, I believe, southwest Atlanta. I do know it's South Atlanta. And all we had was 60. And we stayed around and we asked for another batch, and we waited and we waited and we waited. Did not get one. We volunteered to help the other people who had such enormous stacks, and we were told that we were done. So the thing that was also an oddity to us, whether it was the Sunday bunch, I've done this long enough to know the votes are usually fairly even, and this was not the case either with the absentee type ballots or, when you're seeing a stack where 98% of them are for one candidate. Those are overwhelming odds, particularly when you look at the overall vote count.
Okay. Were there other when we were told to leave? Was there anybody else still left there, still counting?
Oh yes, this was 10 in the morning, and that's why we volunteered to help the gals behind us and the gals in front of us, or anybody else in the room. But we were told to leave. Some other friends of ours, Dr. and Dr. Roll, were told to leave, and so I suggested to my partner that we left. And when we were there the night before, there were pallets of ballots that needed to be addressed and counted. And those pallets were non-existent the next day. And to be told we had to block off so much time and miraculously finish by 10 o'clock on Sunday morning and not required for any other service. That was amazing.
No further questions of this witness.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Wells, thank you for being here with us today, and thank you for working as a poll manager. As it relates to the ballots that you discovered that were pristine and not folded, I'm assuming as a poll manager, you're familiar with the process of ballot duplication?
Yes, I am.
Or replication?
Now, are you speaking if something was flawed and could not go through the scanner? Is that what you're speaking
either
of?
flawed and cannot be read by the scanner, or a UOCAVA ballot that is printed on a home printer overseas and then mailed in, and then is going to be duplicated onto a ballot by poll workers such as yourself?
I certainly am, but if that were the case with these ballots, the markings would not have been identical through 98% of the ballots.
Well, couldn't it be explained, the lack of folding, could that, and the fact that they were more identical, couldn't that be explained by the fact that they were all personally replicated and duplicated with observation by individuals working that same poll?
Well, the probability of that, I would think, is very slight, because why would 98 ballots have that little white eclipse on the very first presidential ballot? Why would all of them be exactly the same? It was very easy to see that a ballot had been replicated many times. One was hand done, the rest had some other marking device, whether it was copied, whether it was scanned,
So your testimony is that they just looked too identical. It's not that, because I understood you to say the fact that they were folded set off alarm, or not folded set off alarms for you, where my more limited understanding of the process is that it makes perfect sense due to the duplication process that not every ballot would be folded. So your testimony is that they looked too similar.
My testimony is
to have
that
been properly duplicated?
Correct. None of them were folded.
But
none of them, if something had been done, it would look somewhat accordion like this. None of them were like this.
Well, so can you educate me for a second? Because I guess what I'm not understanding is why those would be folded, because my understanding of the duplication process is that they indeed would be pristine and not folded.
Well, you would not have had the score marks in them where they should have been folded by, if you're familiar with any type of mailing, whether it's a church bulletin or, your school report cards or whatever it is, they have wonderful folding machines. But they are usually sent by the printer. And I don't think it's the fold so much. It was the feel that drew our attention to how all of these were marked.
So your testimony is it's not so much the fold, it's that they felt differently. Is that correct?
That's what drew our attention to it, was the fact that they felt differently. And then as we began to examine the ballots, we saw that they indeed were different. We had already been through 600, 6 batches, which would have been over 600 ballots. And these were much different.
Not explainable by the normal duplication process that
No.
would be done
No.
as a batch. All right, thank you.
Senator Heath?
You mentioned, I think I got this right, you mentioned a box that had 60 ballots in it.
That was the box on Sunday, yes.
I'm over here.
She's
I'm
over
sorry.
here. She's right there.
You saw my head bobbling around.
Yeah, I thought you were
I'm
on
sorry.
something more
Yes.
important. So.
No. Nothing more important than what you're asking. So, yes, Sunday there were 60 ballots in our box.
And that box was from Quality.
Quality Living Center, and those were all generated on a ballot marking device. which is looking like a larger iPad. It's the Dominion.
So is quality, I'm sorry, is that a voting precinct or is that?
No, sir. It is simply a men's recovery center. And that was very unusual to me also because most of our senior centers have been trying to get at least one sort of precinct designation or early designation for the 20 years that I've been doing this, and they have not. So to have a 60-person facility.
So is this, Fulton County made mention that they had some
Mobile units.
Mobile units that they, it seemed to me that they were saying like they were mobile precincts, that if they had an issue at a precinct, they could roll in there with this thing and take over the work there. I had some questions about how you reprogram a precinct from being precinct 1 to be precinct 54, for example, because there would be potentially different ballots on that, like if there were school board or city council or county commission or whatever. Not all precincts have the same ballot, at least in some elections. So I had some questions about that, but are you implying, or is it possible that this was the results of a mobile precinct that rolled into a quality living center and they all came out and voted? Or
I can't say it's not possible. That is a possibility.
I'm trying to understand how you knew they came from Quality Living Center.
Because that was on the ballot box. Every batch of ballots that we received told us where they had
originated. But that's generally a voting precinct.
No, this is not a voting precinct. This is just where those 60 ballots had come from. They took a voting unit there, and I cannot answer whether it was a single BMD or whether it was the unit.
So it could have been the mobile voting unit or mobile precinct. I think Fulton County testified they had 2 of these, but my point is that they sort of, I'm not sure how the level of detail at the elections, but I don't think you can just decide, we'll have a precinct over to Kroger today from noon to 3, and then we'll move over to somewhere else later that day. I don't, and furthermore, I mean, I understand having ballots, a group of ballots that came from a precinct, but a group of ballots that came from an address doesn't seem right.
If I might answer your question from another direction, when I finally did receive my poll pads and we were trying to have our first voters vote first thing in the morning, the one thing that we noticed, and I did bring, if you'd like to see, I brought the poll pad. The first thing that came up was the voter didn't belong in that poll. And yet I saw her, her ID and her license address and everything like that, and I thought, well, this is screwy. I looked at it, and our poll pads were actually programmed for Adams Park Library. And so it did show her, it gave her directions how to get up to where she was standing physically in front of me. And so then at that point, what was done, since when the text finally came in to remedy this problem, they, with the use of the internet, got a hold of Dominion in Denver, and they were able to reprogram those. But I think on a so that they went for my poll, I think on a different level, and I can't, I'm not even going to speculate on the mobile units.
May I continue? Or? So I thought that I understood that that the voting system was separated from the world by an air gap, that they're not connected to the internet. What I thought I heard you say is that you were able to contact Dominion, they were able to fix the problem. That indicates to me that somehow they're able to communicate with the device that you have.
Yes, sir, they were. And to give you an example, the way I am not a tech person, but the best way I can explain it to you is when something happens with my phone that I have an iPhone, or something happens with my Apple computer where I need additional assistance with that. I call up Apple and I say, this is what's happening. And they say, do I have permission to take over your computer? And of course, I give them the permission to do that because I want it fixed. That was the exact same thing. I had to give them permission to take over my poll pad so that they could reprogram it from Adams Park to SSO2 A and B, which is at West Spalding Drive Elementary.
One final, I think. So as I think through this, there's some protection, should be some protection that keeps me from going to one precinct and voting and driving over to another precinct and voting. That would seem to require that maybe it's this poll pad, not the actual ballot marking device or the scanner, but the poll pad has to be connected to other poll pads. But so maybe what you're saying is that poll pad, that update on the poll pad is not generating ballots. It's only generating a card that you then take to the ballot marking device to vote. Is that correct? Or?
That is partially correct, sir. We also had with our ballot marking devices at the same time, because of whatever was going wrong and we could not encode the cards, they fixed those machines, the ballot marking devices, at the same time. So does that answer your question a little bit more? Yes, they operated remotely on both the ballot marking device and on the poll pads. We also had someone there. We've always been told we cannot take our personal computers or even have our phones there. We also had someone, I'll see if I can try and explain her position, requested by the ACLU, but she was not with the ACLU. She was an attorney, and she was sworn in as a deputy registrar. And her position, because they were anticipating many provisional ballots or absentee ballots coming in where people actually wanted to vote in person, which, by the way, all of those ballots, at the end of the day, if somebody surrenders theirs, they are marked canceled. We tear a portion of that ballot so it cannot go through a scanner. And then they are marked on the machine. But she was always connected to the internet. And we have been told that never, I'm not trying to discredit her. She was doing what she was asked to do, and she was a great deal of help to me personally, because in the past we had to call up and say, has John Smith returned his absentee ballot, and go through a whole bunch. She could do it almost immediately.
Okay, Senator, I have a couple of questions, and we'll need to move on. Senator Kennedy and then Senator Brass.
I'll get you on the next one. Go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Boyles, thank you very much for appearing before this committee. Your experiences and the testimony you bring are critical to us understanding and getting to the bottom of what happens and what happened during the course of the election on Election Day. So thank you very much for being here. My question is really just one. With regard to the pristine ballots that you've talked about and answered some other questions on, can you give us an estimate of what the total number of those ballots that you found suspicious for, on whatever basis it was, but the ones that are in the pristine category? Can you tell us about how many of those you think were there?
Yes, I can. In that batch, there were 110, and that was odd. We were told no batch would be over 100. Sometimes we had 99 because there might have been a disqualified ballot, and that was on the tally sheet that we received beforehand. In that particular batch, there were 2 for Donald J. Trump, there was 1 for Joe Jorgensen, and the remainder of the 110 were for Joseph R. Biden.
Okay. I said one question. Can I ask one more, Mr. Chairman? A different question. Were there, other than the experience that you answered questions about for Senator Heath, of ballots that indicated or had some indicia from which they were sourced geographically, some address or something indicating where they came from, did you see anything like that in addition to what you've already described? That is, ballots that had some indicator or some way to trace back or some suggestion of the sourcing of where they came from geographically?
Yes, this first box that we received all indicated that they were from the center that was put up at State Farm Arena. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Brass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Susie, for being here. Going back to that pristine batch of 110, did you say you've been doing this poll managing for 21 years? Did I hear that earlier? Or?
You heard over 20 years.
Over 20 years, okay. So in your over 20 years experience, have you ever seen a batch that was completely pristine like this with no folds? Yes or no is fine.
No.
Okay. In your 20 plus years experience doing this, have you ever noticed or seen ballots to where the mark was pretty much the same in every spot? Yes or no will be fine.
No.
Okay.
Senator Cardin. Senator Summers. Yeah, sorry about that.
That's all right. Have any of your colleagues in Georgia, 159 counties, you are the mayor, by the way, have they come forward as you've come forward as telling us these facts that you know to be true about the way these ballots are done? Is anybody else in Georgia, poll workers or the head of the poll, doing that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Are you able to, Mr. Mayor, will you be able to submit that to this committee of what will happen?
We have, Ray can address himself to this, we have over 100 affidavits. The witnesses that we're presenting today are just examples of numerous other witnesses who have the same information or similar information. We didn't think we could take up your time with 100 witnesses.
For instance, we had a witness from Bibb County who saw these same pristine ballots in Bibb County.
If I could clarify one other thing, I don't know if Phil made it.
Mr. Mayor, could you pull the microphone closer?
Colonel Waldron made it clear in his testimony. One of the problems with Dominion is it has numerous connections to the internet, and in every state in which we've done investigations, Dominion was connected to the internet and would lie about it, and they would say they weren't. I'd have to look through the affidavits here to see if that's the case here. But in at least 3 other states, numerous witnesses saw the internet connections of Dominion, and the Dominion supervisor would say, no, we're not connected to the internet. And Phil has evidence of those communications into the Dominion machine and communications outside, which we can submit to you.
May I add a comment there about the text and everything? Most of us did not have a technical person within our precinct. We had to wait for one to arrive from Fulton County. So I hear there is a rumor that everybody had a tech, and I talked to Mike Dvorak. I was asking him, and he did not have one in the poll that they managed. I did not have one, and numerous other people had to wait hours for techs to come.
Thank you. Senator Anderson.
Thank you, ma'am, for being here today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going back to Senator Heath's comments, did I understand that the Dominion's supposed to not be tied to the internet or tied to any type?
That is my understanding. However,
But Okay.
It is, and if you look on their own website, I told you I'm not a real big tech person, but they showed you how to repair things or how to download things.
Now, did I hear you correctly say that you could call them and then they could, over the phone, fix the machine?
We did call them, and they did fix our machine over the phone.
All right. How do you honestly know that you was really talking to somebody from Dominion?
How do I know when I call Georgia Power that I'm honestly talking with somebody from Georgia Power?
Right, but I mean,
That's the number that we're given.
Really, we don't even know if you're really talking. You're hoping you are, but you're really not knowing that you're really talking to the right people. I mean, I don't.
Well, that sounds a little more nefarious than I'm giving.
I mean, it's a possibility, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, I guess anything's a possibility, but if Fulton County gives us or gives our techs a number
Right.
for Dominion, I would assume.
And they can fix it over the phone.
Right, they fixed it right there. I can.
I
think
got.
that's all our questions here from Ms. Voice. Thank you, ma'am, for being here today. We appreciate your time.
Thanks for having us.
We'll move on to.
Could I take one point of personal privilege
Yes,
for a
ma'am.
minute? One of my concerns over the years has been how many laws have been set concerning our voting system, and I take this very, very seriously. And so when the new secretary was in, I went into the office and I did speak with Sam Teasley, and I said, how many people in here have ever worked a polling location to see beyond theory, have seen the actual practice? And I do have to compliment Sam Teasley out of that office for taking me up, and he worked, his wife worked, and his daughter worked so they could compare notes. And I really appreciate when people will do that. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think we were going to move on to Ms. Bridget Throne. Bridget Throne. She's out there. Okay, are you Bridget Throne? Thorne, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Bridget Thorne, if you would, well, Mr. Smith, you were going to ask her some questions.
Hi.
Good afternoon, Ms. Thorne. Would you state your full name for the record and tell us where you're from?
Bridget Elaine Thorne. I'm from Alpharetta, Georgia.
Okay. And Ms. Thorne, I think you're here today to talk about the lack of securing paper ballots and such. And
Yes.
Can you tell us about that, please?
Yes, I guess you have my whole testimony here.
Yeah, just kind of a summary, if you will.
Summary of it,
And
okay.
We'll flush it out and ask questions if we need to.
Great. I've worked with Fulton County elections for approximately 9 years. As just a precinct manager, poll worker, I've tried to step up whenever they needed. They don't ask us managers for much help, which when Rob Pitts was talking about staffing the State Farm Arena, they never reach out to us managers in North Fulton County to come and help with early voting. I've made extensive efforts to try to help, to try to be a manager, and then I find out that unexperienced people are managing precincts. So it was a bit frustrating listening to you this morning. But I did, through a lot of effort, was able to get tech certified, and I was trained by Dominion to be a poll tech worker. And last minute, they said I could come down to the warehouse because they needed help. I went down to the warehouse for 5.5 days. I was there from 8 a.m. to approximately 10 p.m. My job was primarily printing test ballots, and these were real ballots. I had reams of roll-in paper behind my desk, and I could print ballots all day long. And I did, pretty much, because we had to run tests, 21 ballots for every section of a precinct. Some precincts had 4 sections, so we'd have 80-some ballots. It was quite common that these ballots would go lost or missing, and we would have to reprint them. Kind of a bummer. So in my course of printing these ballots, and when we made mistakes, before I put them in the shredder case, I would spoil them, because as a manager, I know, like, this is a real ballot. I can't let it get in the wrong hands. And so I started spoiling them, and the girl who was over me, who had no poll worker experience, she's a friend of the Dominion person, she's like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm spoiling ballots before I put them in this suitcase that's just in the middle of the room." And she kind of questioned, and then I went over one day and I pulled out a stack of ballots out of that case that was unattended, that was 8 inches high. So throughout the day, I put them next to me, and I just started tearing them, because I could tear more than mark each one through, and spoil the ballots. The next day, the girl who was over me, she came to me and she said that she spoke to the head Dominion girl, and that what I was doing was correct, that they were way too loose with the ballots in the warehouse. But there was no directive for anybody else to spoil ballots, and I never went back in the suitcase and pulled out extra ballots. Then on Friday, when early voting concluded, I was just working at my little station, and some other tech poll workers that were trained like me came up and said, "Bridget, you're a manager, is this correct?" And I'm like, what's going on? And they're like, "They're just pulling out ballots." And they had brought all the tabulator scanners out from State Farm Arena and wheeled them in the warehouse. And I guess I should back up. The warehouse was run by Dominion people, because the Fulton County employees had a COVID outbreak. So they were all quarantined, 24 of them. So this was all run by Dominion software people. And I realized they probably have never worked an election, and they don't know the security and the preciousness of a ballot, of someone's vote. So I went over to look at the situation with the coworkers, and I was quickly reprimanded and told, "Bridget, it's fine. We've been doing this all week." And I didn't know what to say, because I had no authority. I was bothered by it, and I told the poll workers, I'm like, "Well, you know, the media card's what's really important. The paper ballots are just backups. So it'll be okay. They're not going to need these paper ballots anyway." And I was uncomfortable, and I walked away. I went back to my desk to print more test ballots. I had a break. I went over and just helped a gentleman pull ballots out, throw them in a suitcase. People left for dinner, just left the ballots sitting on the floor, unattended. I left that night at 10 p.m., and there was still a suitcase with ballots that I passed as I was walking out the door. It was completely unattended, just left there. And I was uncomfortable with it, but I went ahead and left. The next morning, I came into the warehouse. And by the way, to get in the warehouse, you just had to say, "I'm with Fulton County Elections." They buzzed you in. Anybody could go in. There was a loading dock. Anybody could drive up to the loading dock and walk in the building. And one woman actually did, and she was kicked out later in the day. So I walked out in that morning, and there were no Dominion employees there. There were probably 10 of us there, and all the ballot suitcases were sealed, and they were just stacked in the corner of the warehouse. And for me, I thought, this is just not secure. Someone could just wheel these. I could have wheeled them out to my car. I could have wheeled them to the loading dock. I could have changed out ballots. I could have done anything. So that was Friday, but I tried not to worry about it. Then on Sunday, it was my last day in the warehouse. And I was just sticking around because in case they lost ballots again, I would be there to reprint. But I had nothing to do, so I decided I would leave the desk, and there was no other people printing test ballots that night. I thought I would leave my desk and I would go out into the floor and help. So I was away for an hour or so. It was 10 o'clock at night. I thought, it's time for me to go. And I go to my desk, and there's a Dominion worker, and there was a consultant who had been in the warehouse that whole week. I thought he was a warehouse consultant. I've Now I figured out he's not a warehouse consultant. He was from the elections group. He was from Chicago. The two of them were printing ballots. And I thought, oh my gosh, they need some more test ballots. They lost test ballots. So I sat down and I'm like, oh, let me help you guys. What do you need? And do I start from the bottom? Do I start from the top? And the Dominion worker was like, oh, you can start from the bottom. And so I started. And then he's like, well, I got to go. Then the consultant guy who was printing ballots, I look over and I notice he's printing random ballots. I'm like, there's an order when you print test ballots. The purpose of a test ballot is so that you can vote for each candidate. So you either start from the top and vote for the first person all the way across, and then the second person, etc. This guy was just printing random ballots. And so I went over and instructed him, hey, you know, to print test ballots, you got to do it this way. And he's like, oh, do I have to vote for Trump? I'm like, yeah, you got to vote for Trump. And then he started printing some ballots, and then he said he had to leave, so he left. And it was 10 o'clock at night, so I just finished up printing that batch of test ballots, ran it over to the person, and then I left. So then I'm also a precinct manager. So I manage the precinct and I'm concerned over the emergency ballots. You guys passed a law that 10% of every voter in the poll book, you have to have an emergency ballot. Well, in my precinct, I got yellow sample ballots. They were on yellow cheap paper, said sample across them. So I got 250 of these. So I called the warehouse. I said, where are my emergency ballots? I mean, I hope I don't need them, but where are they? And I took a picture, sent them a picture, and they're like, yeah, that's not right. And we don't know where they are. We can't find them. And in my training as a manager, I've never been trained the importance of securing the emergency ballots. When I've gone into the check-in center at the end of the night, there's no accountability. In the June election, they didn't even have forms when they checked us in. They didn't have ballot recap sheets, which is the most important thing you need as well. But they didn't have check-in forms to say, hey, you turned in all your provisional ballots that were unused. You turned in all your emergency ballots. There's no checking. The next election, you think, okay, that was the first time we used the system. Maybe they'll get it right. So the second time I went to check in, they had the old check-in forms with old language, DREs. And I'm like, okay, I'll sign off, but here's all my emergency ballots, here's all my unused provisional ballots. So you think the third time they would get a form. I go to check in that night, they don't have forms. The girl at the Roswell check-in center said she just made one up. But there was nowhere on there to say, Bridget had 250 emergency ballots, and she's turned in those ballots. There's nowhere to say that my provisional ballots, and I'm a split precinct, so I did have proper provisional ballots for my B precinct, but none for my A precinct. So that was concerning. And I did write my superior at Fulton County Elections, and she sent it on to her superiors, and I have not heard back about my concerns. I did send it to the Secretary of State. I sent my concerns prior to the election, and they were supposed to forward it on to the correct people. I went back to the Secretary of State after the election with my post-election concerns. I've not heard back from the Secretary of State. I attended the Board of Elections meeting this last week on Monday morning while I was in the airport, and I was going to give my testimony of securing the ballots, and I was muted 15 seconds into my presentation. So I feel like I'm not heard, or it's not a concern. I was also concerned about the Fulton County. Rob Pitts didn't mention to you this morning, but they had ACLU clerks in every single Fulton County location to process absentee ballots. I was concerned because my clerk was not trained. She was trained the day before. She seemed very intelligent. She's a lawyer. she wasn't trained to collect an affidavit if you're clearing an absentee ballot. I was also concerned that she was using her personal laptop, but I guess that's fine to have the whole voter database and who turned in absentee ballots and who didn't on your personal laptop. So those are just some of my concerns. I kind of went around, so I'm sure you have some questions.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there any questions from any of the Senator Heath?
I don't want to jump ahead of any of you smart guys in here.
The rest of that.
You just, a lot of information there that could.
I'm sorry.
There was a lot of information there that could certainly cause me concern, but one of the last things you were talking about, these emergency ballots and you mentioned the absentee ballots. So who all knows, if I request an absentee ballot, who all knows whether or not I have voted that absentee ballot?
In previous years, we would have to call downtown to Fulton County elections, and they would clear a voter to vote on the machines. In this election, there was a lot of snafus because there were so many absentee ballots sent out back in June. So the solution was to put an ACLU absentee clerk in every precinct that would do the job of the Fulton County people, because the phones would jam. And I would have 3 poll workers on the phone calling the 3 different lines, and we would just sit there and let it ring and ring and ring until someone got through. And then we'd clear our line of voters that we had so they could go vote on the machines. But I don't know, maybe that's public information of who has turned in their absentee ballot. It seems like if it was public information, then I would have loved to have been able to look it up myself on my phone.
Do you have any concern that if I knew which available absentee ballots were out there and uncast, that it might be a good opportunity to do whatever with, whether it was call them up and say, hey, you need to go vote today, or
You haven't turned in your ballot? Can I come get it?
Can I come help you, or whatever? Help me with these emergency ballots. Is that what you called them?
Yes, emergency ballots.
So these are legitimate ballots.
Yes, supposedly.
And so how are they used they're to be used in a voting precinct? Mm-hmm. What condition would you need an emergency ballot in a voting precinct?
So an example that they give us in our training classes is if, like my precinct's in a school. So if the school person doesn't show up to open up the school and I need to open up the polls, I can go ahead and open up the polls on the sidewalk with emergency ballots until I can get in the school.
And let people vote on those ballots and drop them in your briefcase or whatever?
They give us a orange bag. I mean, fortunately, I've never had to do this, but they give us an orange bag for provisional, because I'm not allowed to touch a ballot once someone has cast a ballot.
And so what happens to them? What happens to that orange bag after that? Are they then fed through the ballot scanning device, or?
So it depends. Like if you had a power failure and you were in your precinct, all the scanner tabulator, either the cabinet or the standalone, have an emergency ballot drop box. So I did process 5 emergency ballots back in June because our cards weren't printing correctly, and it took us a little bit of time to get the card thing working right. So I let 5 people vote emergency, and they went over and they filled them out, and then they dropped them in the emergency drop box. And then at a slow point in the day, I have to announce to the entire precinct that I'm opening that emergency ballot box. I have to have 2 people with me, and I can take them out, I can touch them, and then I put them through the scanner myself.
Senator Dolezal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Thorne, for being here. I've got 2 different things I'd like to ask you about. The first one, you just said something that caught my attention. What was the role of the ACLU? And you said they were in every precinct. How do you know they were in every precinct? But what did you observe them doing?
On Sunday, while I was in the warehouse working as a tech, my supervisor sent an email. She's over all of North Fulton County, and she gave us bullet points of what we needed to do to prepare for the election. And the last bullet point was that we would have an ACLU clerk in every precinct to process ballots, absentee ballots.
I've read our code, and I don't read anything in Georgia law about having an ACLU. Would you say it was an ACLU tech?
It was an ACLU clerk.
I'm sorry, ACLU
So
clerk.
I assumed it was just an ACLU lawyer.
What were they doing?
So if a voter came in, and most voters aren't familiar with absentee ballots, if they want to vote on the machines, they don't bring their ballots. And so to make sure that they haven't already voted or already cast their absentee ballot, we have to get them cleared so that we can issue a card to vote on the machines. If they bring their ballot in, it's no problem. We just spoil it, put it in an envelope, and then they're able to vote on the machines.
Okay. I want to go back to really your primary function, it sounds like, in this election. You were a poll tech worker working for Dominion to, I believe, fulfill this provision of our law that requires the third day before a primary election or the fifth day before a general election, essentially test the scanners, right? Print out the known set of ballots with a known result, run those through the scanners, and ensure that scanner delivers the result of the known set of ballots. Is that accurate?
Yes, but my primary job was just printing the test ballots.
So,
but the one night where I was went out on the floor and did run an actual test, I went through and I realized that I printed 2 for Kelly Loeffler accidentally, but it was kind of late, so I just went ahead and ran it. And when I took my card to Dominion, it passed the test anyway.
Where was this taking place? Was this
in the Georgia World Congress Center, Building B?
Okay, and you were requested to be there by the Fulton County Election Board, the people you've worked with before, but Dominion was actually facilitating the function of the test. I guess approximately how many scanners would you say that you all had to test?
Oh, geez, there were 255 precincts. Each has one scanner. Even mine, with only 2,000 voters, they sent 2 scanners. So, I don't know, maybe, 400.
In our code, it speaks to this being done by the superintendent. Would you say that the Fulton County staff was in charge of this process, or were you receiving your primary direction from Dominion staff?
I was receiving it from Dominion staff.
Okay. And you said this took the course over a couple of days to test these couple.
I was there 5.5 days, but people were there a week before me.
What day did you all conclude your work?
Sunday night, I believe.
The Sunday night before the election?
It was strange because I would leave thinking there was no work to be done, and they didn't need my help anymore, but there were a group of people that would always stay, and then I'd come back the next day, and they're like, "Oh, we stayed till 2 a.m." Just
to clarify, this is the Sunday before the election that you
Correct.
all concluded your work. So you all did not fulfill the Georgia law that says honor before the third day before the election, because you were finishing on the second day before the election.
Yes, correct. But that might have been due to the COVID and not using their regular staff.
Okay. I appreciate your time, and thank you for clarifying that for me.
Senator Summers.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Thorne, is there any way you can estimate the improprieties roughly that you saw? I know you're not, you won't hold water, but I mean, how many votes do these improprieties you spoke of possibly could that have represented? Any way of knowing that number?
Yeah, I have no idea. I failed to mention the Friday after they emptied the ballots. People in the warehouse were coming up to me and bringing me ballots and asking, "Are these real ballots or test ballots?" And I honestly had no way of telling. And so we would just spoil the ballot and put it away.
What's a test ballot?
It's the one that we're using to test the scanners, the tabulators.
Thank you. Senator Parent, did you have a question?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to, no, I really don't. I was just going to clarify for Senator Dolezal about the ACLU Deputy Registrar's Program.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, so the ACLU, we had a choke point, especially during early voting, with people that had requested absentee ballots but decided they wanted to vote in person. So to help eliminate that choke point, ACLU launched this Deputy Registrar's Program that attorneys could participate in and be trained to add additional staff to cancel the absentees and let the people vote in person. And they partnered with Fulton. We actually wanted them to partner with DeKalb, and that ended up not happening. But yeah, it's not, you're not going to find it in the code.
They just weren't trained to take an affidavit before they cleared the ballot, which is kind of a huge snafu on my part, I would say.
Anything? Mr. Smith, did you have anything? Okay. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Thorne. Appreciate it.
Appreciate
Okay, now we'll move on to Mark Amick. Mr. Smith, did you have some questions for Mr. Amick?
I do not.
You do not? Okay. Dana Smith. Okay. We'll let Mr. Amick go ahead.
Am I free to go?
Yes, sir. Tell
Okay.
us who you are, where you live, and try to get to the point. Be
Succinct.
We have, that's right.
I understand.
We have a lot of people that want to talk.
Yep, I understand. I appreciate that. My name is Mark Amick. I live here in Milton, Georgia, and I'm a statewide poll watcher for this past election. I want to thank you all for the opportunity to speak here today and speak about these important matters and observations that I saw in my role, fraud and other irregularities in the process. You know, there's a few different things, and I'll get through these relatively quickly, as again, to be succinct. There was one instance on Election Day where I was denied entry into a polling location at Birmingham Falls Elementary in Milton, Georgia. I was wearing my badge and presented my Secretary of State letter to the poll manager. She denied me entry. I pointed to the information on the letter that designated that I was allowed to be there. She disagreed, would not let me in, and was turned away. I was also went to two other locations in Roswell on election morning. Both instances which I was informed that Democrat poll watchers were engaging with voters outside of the elementary schools. This was at Mimosa Elementary, and both of these turned out to be valid as well. This was at Mimosa Elementary, where they were standing between the parking lot and the entryway to the school, engaging with voters to and from. And then also at Esther Jackson Elementary School, where the two Democrat poll watchers there had been engaging with voters outside of the school while they were in line, apparently collecting voter data on their phones. Moving ahead to the recount, the first one that is, in DeKalb County on Sunday, November 15th, I arrived at that facility. The observation process was very difficult. The tables were set up in groups of 16, yet we were only allowed one person for every 10 tables, so that was difficult to manage through. We were required to be 6 feet away from the tables and as well as the personnel, despite our being issued a required mask by DeKalb County. After growing frustrated with trying to watch this process, I tried to find somewhere where I could go add some more value. So I decided to stand behind a table where the two workers were actually entering in the signed vote totals into the Arlo system for the final count. I was standing about 6 feet or so behind the workers. While I could not see the computer screen to validate what they were entering into the system, I was able to read the sheets that the person was providing to them. So I decided I would start taking notes on that in case there was an opportunity to provide an audit or something that was necessary to cross-reference what was actually submitted and what was actually input into the system. After a while, I was able to see a pattern of what I would expect in terms of the vote totals. I'd ballpark that around 1,500. And one came through that was a serious red flag, and that one came through at 10,707 votes for Biden and 13 for President Trump. And so I turned to the person that was next to me and said it to her, but loud enough so the workers in front of me could hear that. And that was that 10,000 votes for Biden, that can't be right. And wanted to make sure that they heard that so that it would get flagged. They then whispered amongst themselves for some time, trying to figure out what to do. Eventually, a manager was called over, and I followed that paper and that manager through the process. She went towards the back of the room where they take the ballots in and out and spoke with two other workers. I stayed some distance back because of requirements, but yet I could make out the fact that they were trying to ascertain what that vote total was as well and why it was that way. They also discussed about whether or not to make that change on their own based upon what they thought that the two counters had meant for that total to be. Although they did, I think they decided not to do that because one, they looked over at me, made some eye contact, and the conversation changed to a whisper. But at the same time, they were also talking about they could not determine how that error had occurred or fraud because the numbers didn't match up. It wasn't a decimal, it wasn't a digit issue. It was so significantly wrong. Later through that process, I decided to engage Mr. Tillman, who was who I understood to be the election director for DeKalb County there, and informed him of the issue, let him know the serious concern that I had, and that we discussed recounting that box. He went and verified that with his team, and he came back and agreed that that 10,000 count couldn't possibly be right. And we worked out an arrangement to where I would follow that box through the rest of the process, through the recounting process, to ensure that it was counted correctly. And we had a new team come in about 45 minutes later. I watched and observed that process. I think the new team that came in did an excellent job. And that final vote total for Biden ended up being 1,081 and not 10,707 as initially submitted and signed off on by the two counters to be going into the system. So 9,626 vote difference, pretty significant. I also did flag the fact that, it's, I don't know if they have gone back to look at what those other two counters have done with other ballot boxes to validate that authenticity as well, and certainly don't know if anything was skimmed off the tops of the others, a few votes here and there, give or for any given candidate. But the egregious error was what I was able to catch. Going back to November 6th, these two incidents occur at State Farm Arena, where on the day that they were that they were processing the provisional ballots, the military and UOCAVA ballots on that day. Two things with this. One was after observing the process, I flagged it the next day in email and then signed an affidavit to the fact that I thought that the process lent itself and was open to significant fraud opportunities at 2 points. So what they do, as my understanding, as it was explained to us by Rick Barron, that what they will do with the military and overseas the UOCAVA is they will email a form to that voter. That voter then prints the form, marks the form with their vote choices, and then mails back that hard copy. Fulton County, they receive it, they go through a process of what's called duplication. And what that process was, as it was explained to us, is that a worker who we were not allowed to engage with or witness to verify its authenticity will then take that form and then is supposed to duplicate that voter's choice onto the ballot. This is all, in a situation where you're not able to observe it from a distance roughly this far apart or greater. Actually, it is greater than this. So no possible way to see it, and no verification or authenticity of the process that I could see and that we were told or informed about. Another serious concern with that process happens later when the ballots are then provided to another individual who actually goes and casts the ballots. So you are not allowed to see what ballot choices are cast on behalf of that voter that's in our military or overseas. And that, in my opinion, was an opportunity because there's no validation or observation or ability to observe whether that was done correctly as well. And then after I flagged that early on, like I said, the next day and filed an affidavit to my concerns over that process, and obviously have since learned that vote total ended up being roughly 900 to nothing in favor of Joe Biden versus President Trump. So pretty alarming and concerning. On that same day, I noticed this is in regards to the Secretary of State's representative that was on site that day. And what this is basically entailing, I believe I've provided this information previously, and that is that the vote count was supposed to start at 8:30. It didn't start until roughly 8:50 that morning. I first noticed the Secretary of State representative that entered the room around mid-morning, and didn't make too much of that at the time, but something told me, because I went back and looked at my notes and what I did from a picture standpoint, that something was not quite right, because at 11:45 I was documenting already that he was outside the room leaning against the wall on his phone, texting or what have you. Now that in itself wouldn't be that particularly big deal, but something had struck me that I needed to start documenting that. As it goes through the day, approximately 1:35, I realized that it was the first time that I had seen this representative who was potentially providing oversight actually out on the floor with the workers. And the first time I had seen that was at 1:35. And I want to clarify that I got there at 8:20. I was probably one of the first couple people there in the room. I took the first table in the front row, and that's predominantly where I stayed most of the day. I noticed that as I looked around and wondered where he was at the rest of the time, I noticed that he was actually back in the corner on his phone. And so what I decided to do from that point on, and I should ask, and I don't know if it's proper to ask, so I apologize if it's not proper protocol, but I've submitted pictures if they've been made available. If not, I do have those on a jump drive that I have brought with me. I probably should have brought that up first.
I'm sorry, just tell us what you saw, and we'll open it up for a few questions.
Sure, so fair enough. So what I decided to then do was further document that this person was not providing oversight, just in case there was a claim later that there was, because my concerns over how the ballots were being processed. And so I started taking selfies over my shoulder, so I've got this so I can validate that it's me, it's over my shoulder, and he's further back in the corner, just kind of semi-slumped on his phone in different positions. And I started taking pictures at 2:37, 3:51, 4:47, 5:41, and so on forth, that he was back there in the corner of the back of the room, not providing oversight or engagement or anything on the floor there. I did leave for dinner for a bit, and when I came back, I had walked down the hall briefly. He was at the end of the hall on a phone call. I walked out. He was a few steps behind me, and he was complaining about parking. He was concerned about, I'm not sure if I parked in the Ruby lot or if it's the red lot, and if I don't know how this is going to work, and if it's the red lot or the Ruby lot, and the cost because he was going to be there for over 10 hours and how expensive that was going to be. So, and then through the rest of the evening, he was predominantly at the back of the room, and I provided specific time points of when he entered and what have you for the record.
Okay. All right. Any questions for Mr. Senator Dolezal?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Number 5. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Was it Mr. Amick? I don't want to mispronounce your name.
Yes, thank you.
Sure. You've been doing this for a number of years, from what I gather from your testimony. Is that correct? The poll observing?
Actually, this is my third presidential.
Great.
Yes.
How does your access this year relative to distances compare to your access in previous years?
So that's an interesting question. So I moved here roughly 3.5 years ago from Texas. So my reference point is a little bit different, from that perspective. But I will say that the ability to access and witness the process was significantly limited in every part of the process, whether it was just going to a polling location or certainly State Farm Arena and certainly DeKalb County.
You mentioned the Secretary of State's poll watcher, which, as I understand, is the result of a settlement from when the state sued Fulton County some years ago, that we now have a Secretary of State paid poll watcher in the room. Was this gentleman that you observed the only Secretary of State poll watcher? How did you identify him as being such? Did you see anybody else that was working under the direction of the Secretary's office?
I did not. So the gentleman, when he came in, there was another watcher with us who said that was the individual, and he had on the little gold Secretary of State emblem lapel pin. And he certainly was, he was out on the floor and engaged with the manners whenever he chose, which was limited, but that was how I was able to ascertain that.
So he had access to the floor, obviously, that you were not, being that he's a state employee.
Correct.
And were you there? This was during the recount process? The risk limiting audit recount process?
So that particular day was November 6th, which was still the processing of the initial count.
Okay.
So it was provisional, military, and UOCAVA.
Okay. So just to clarify, in that room, and I believe it's the room we saw the video from earlier then, is that accurate?
I did not see I was not here at the time to see the video, so I can't
How
reference
large was the room approximately?
It's too large to observe, and the layout of the room is kind of dog-legged, so you can't, the way they have you pushed back against one part of the area, which is a short part of the room, it extends way past, and you actually can't see. There's actually a door where they bring, at least that's my understanding, because you can't see it.
That sounds like the room that we saw the video of earlier. And just to clarify, so in your day there, you saw one member of the Secretary of State staff, and you would, I guess, as a blanket statement, describe him as mildly engaged in oversight process and more engaged in doing something on his phone in a corner of the room.
I don't even think that I wouldn't go as far as saying mildly engaged.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, any other questions? Any other questions? Senator Tillery?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're on. Get it close.
I want to go back into your testimony and ask you, when you said you identified that ballot box that was way skewed, not the 900 to 0 one, but the one before that, what was the process of the recount, or what happened to make those numbers change? Did somebody pull the paper out and count it? Was it a card that someone reran? Can you help me understand that?
Sure. So I just want to make sure we're talking about, just to clarify, so the DeKalb recount?
Box. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Can you remind me of the numbers just so I can make sure that's the one I was talking about?
Sure. So what was signed off and submitted to be entered into that Arlo system as final was 10,707 votes for Biden and 13 for Trump.
And this would have been signed off on just like a sheet, or this would have been a box and they would have put a number on top of it and said this is 10,000 to 1,000?
Yeah, sure. So what they do is, after they do a count, there's I'm approximating the form, but they basically would say the batch, which is the box. So it had an identification number associated with that. There was a color table, and then the number that was associated with it. And then it would have the count for the candidates on those sheets with different line items. And at the bottom, 2 spaces for signatures to supposedly authenticate and validate that the count is correct.
So to re-verify that, or when you noted it, and thank you for noting it, did they actually open a box and go back through and recount it, or do you know?
So,
how that,
so I didn't see
I'm trying to figure out if it was data or if it was paper. That's kind of what I'm trying to get to.
Sure. So I did not see the counting of that box initially. So what I was doing is I was standing back because the counting was just, it wasn't adding a lot of value, I didn't think. And so I was trying to find something that would make a difference. And so I stood behind the table where they take those sheets and they'll say, okay, batch 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, X amount for Biden, X amount for President Trump, and the person enters that in the computer, okay? So I was standing back there. I was able, because I was taking notes of those items as we went through, I was able to gain an expectation of what the total should be, or a pattern with therein. And that one came through as so egregious and so large that that's how I was able to get flagged, frankly.
if you had not flagged it, is it something, and I'm asking you to kind of going down the road, you may not know this about our election procedure, and I apologize for asking you a question you may not know the answer
That's fine,
to.
yep.
If you had not flagged it and we had gone through this recanvassing process, is this something that would have been caught then, or do you think it would have gone through that entire process and not been caught too?
So that's part of a process I couldn't speak to, so I certainly would hate to
That's very fair.
speculate beyond that.
I didn't
I
know.
will say that I was concerned about it being entered in based upon what they said later, because as the sheets were brought back to verify, okay, here's the original, after we went through the recount process, again, I tracked those sheets because I was not going to let that out of my sight.
Right.
And they were brought over to the table, and we verified side by side. I also had a couple other people look, so it wasn't just me, so that people could see the initial sheets and the totals and that they were signed off on. But the lady the workers that changed out, one of them had changed out, and the one that was there said that she could feel, the phrase was, she knew it was wrong, but she could feel the eyes upon her. And so that made me, is an interesting phrase, and leads credence to why we have poll watchers, frankly.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Mr. We appreciate your time today. Thank you, and we're going to need to move on to the next witness, so
Sure.
we appreciate you being
Thank you.
here. All right. The next we'll call Dana Smith. Is that correct?
I have photos. Does anyone need a copy of the photos and copy of the, pardon me? Okay, so here are some packets of photos if anyone wants some. I also submitted a thumb drive that someone was going to try to pick up for those of you that don't have it. And if someone needs a copy of my affidavit or something like that, I have those here as well.
To speak it so that we can hear you.
Oh,
you're
let me
gonna have
take
to
this
pull
off.
your mask off. Yes.
Sorry.
Thank you.
You forget they're on.
That's right.
Okay, so,
Ms. Smith, would you state your full name and address where you live?
Yes.
For the record, and then you can talk about your experience as a poll worker in Hart County.
sure. My name is Dana Van Buren Smith, and I reside in Hartwell, Georgia. And I was a poll worker for the November 3rd election, and I was also a poll watcher for the first initial paper ballot count on November 13th, and also a poll watcher for counting the absentee ballots on the following Monday, which would be November 16th. I, in my regular life, have been a licensed practical nurse for 33 years, and I got laid off from my urgent care job because of low census with COVID infections. Our census dropped at our urgent care center. And then we relocated to Georgia about 6 months ago. So I found myself without a lot to do and some time on my hands. So I decided just to do my patriotic duty and be a poll watcher. So I went through the training and I was really excited, and I felt like our process in Hart County was good. You know, going into it, I thought, oh, this is going to be solid. It was wonderful. I was excited for the day. But as the day progressed and as things happened, I became more and more alarmed. I have 4 things that really bothered me, and I'm going to move through the initial 3 things pretty quickly because the big thing is at the end. The first thing, and I'm going to kind of read it to help myself out. On Election Day, someone had turned the natural gas off to the building. And so we had set up all of the machines the day before, and the heat was working in the rec center where our polling place was. I understand that that rec center used to be a barn that had been converted into this rec center. And so it's a big hulking building, and it was freezing cold when we got in there. That morning I had got up, and we had been in the low 30s. And I had to use my heated seat in my car and my heater, and we arrived and the building was really cold. So they called HVAC people in, and the HVAC people worked all morning, and it was sometime afternoon that an HVAC guy came in and said that someone had shut off the natural gas to the building, and that's why our heat wasn't working. He indicated that nothing was wrong with the heater. Some unknown person in the night had shut off the gas to the building. Well, we all cheered and hoorayed because the heat finally came on, and at that time I did not know that Georgia law requires that that electronic equipment be kept in a climate-controlled environment, which having it in a freezing cold building all night long, in my view, does not constitute a climate-controlled environment. I found this out the next night when I read Georgia law. Because of all the things that happened, I thought I probably better figure out what is going on here. And that's when I learned that the machines were supposed to be in a climate-controlled environment. There is no alarm system in the place where these things are being stored to notify if these machines have come out of climate control compliance. And I noted in the Georgia election law that there isn't a requirement to have an alarm system. And so my plea to you is that I think you need to look at that and require these places, maybe free up some money so these places could get a $300 alarm system to let them know if they have in fact violated the law and gone out of compliance. I do not know with the temperature that night if they were out of the range, but in January when we have our election coming up, the Georgia mountains can be pretty chilly. So you probably ought to look into that. How can you verify if something went out of compliance if you have no alarm? I do know that someone in the night shut the gas off to the building, and we had a really cold building. I don't know who did that, what time or why, because there was no alarm. The next concern I have is that the Democratic poll watcher checked in the morning and then left for the rest of the day. The sheriff who was on hand stated to us that he was sitting out in his car in the parking lot all day, which I thought was an interesting place for him to be watching what was going on. Our Republican poll watcher, mid-morning, was removed by an official because the supervisor could not locate her paperwork. Also, no one had supplied her with the proper paperwork, so she was missing for a while. I put in my statement several hours. I spoke with her after because I wasn't sure how long she was gone, and she said it wasn't several hours, it was about a half an hour. But she was so upset, she returned to her home and didn't stay there and was gone for a period of time because she was so rattled by what had happened. The third issue I noted was that the special printing paper for the paper ballots to be printed on was not secured, and mid-morning there was a poll watcher walking around with this special ballot paper, taking coffee orders on it, writing down coffee orders on this special ballot paper that prints the ballots, those precious ballots. She was taking a coffee order on it. To me, anyone can just walk over and grab that specialty paper and then get in their order for the ballots they want to print. All of that is pretty upsetting, but the worst thing to me is where those pictures come in, and I don't know, are we able to put the pictures up for people can see? I gave a thumb drive to someone.
Sure. Are those the pictures that you passed out? I think
it's the pictures that I passed out, but I
Yes.
had a thumb drive as well so that everyone could see.
Okay. Yes, if you could pass the thumb drive over to our assistant.
Okay, I'll give you some background to the pictures while they're putting up the thumb drive. With all the electronic voting equipment, the poll pads, the ballot marking devices, the scanner, all of those pieces of equipment have these plastic numbered tag locks that secure them. The other thing that secures those is a chain of custody form or a recap form. That's how you know that the SD cards haven't been removed, that nothing's been tampered with. It's these numbered locks that protect all those items, and the chain of custody forms that are witnessed by two people verify the numbers on those locks. And as soon as you pull those plastic tabs out, they break and you can't reuse them. So if you were going to tamper, now you have a problem as long as there's a chain of custody form with two witnesses, because that's what proves what the lock number was. At the end of the night, the polling station closed, and we were getting, packing up all the equipment, and it's a very arduous process. Every piece of equipment has these recap forms, these chain of custody forms. You're double checking the locks, you're relocking them, you're securing them, you're checking serial numbers and bagging them up in the case that matches the piece of equipment. It's a very rigorous setup so that you can ensure that you're locking up this electronic equipment in a way that it can't be tampered with at any given time. So at the end of the night, we go to empty these scanners. So the voter comes in, they present at the polling pad, they show their ID, we give them a green like a credit card. They go over to the ballot marking device and they put it in their ballot marking machine. They electronically vote and mark who they want. Then it prints a paper ballot on that specialty paper, right? The voter then takes that specialty paper printed ballot, they carry it over to one of the scanner machines, and we ask them to look at the paper ballot and make sure that it shows who they voted for. That paper ballot is the safeguard. That's why we ask them to look at it so that they can confirm that's who they voted for. At that point, the voter puts it into the scanner where it's scanned electronically. The paper ballot then drops down into a large container, somewhat similar to like a garbage can, a big plastic garbage can, and all day long, all those paper ballots fall down into that container, all hodgepodge, every which way, and just collect in that. So at the end of the night, and that scanner is, and that container, that's protected with actually a couple of mechanical locks and a couple of numbered plastic security locks like those you see in the picture. So at the end of the night, the final task is to unlock those bins and collect all of those paper ballots that have fallen into that big container. We collect all of those. You look up inside and make sure none of them have been hung up. There are at least two witnesses for each of those bins, which there's two of those bins. We had 4 people plus a couple other people around, plus our local sheriff was there as well. So all these people are watching us take out these paper ballots. And we put them into these red canvas bags. It looks kind of orangey in the picture, but there was one red canvas bag per bin, and there was also the red canvas bag that held the provisional ballots that were brought in for that night. So we bring them in. These bags have a specialty zipper and then this flap lock so that that red numbered tab lock can go in them. So we get all the paper ballots into the red bags, zip them up, and I said, where are the number locks? And nobody could find the number locks. They'd gone missing. So I got the supervisor, Sarah's, attention, and I said, we need the number locks. And these locks are a little different configuration than the ones that go on the voting machines and stuff. They just click in there, and then if you pull it out, it breaks. So she said she didn't have any, and for us to just zip it up and throw them in the blue totes, which are the other pictures that you see, unsecured, and that would be good enough, and they would drive them to the election office, which is maybe between 10 and maybe probably 10 to 12 minutes from our polling place. And I told her, no way, we are not loading these paper ballots into the back of your car with you and your friend to drive them to the election office. You call Robin at the election office and you tell her to have someone bring us the locks. She rolled her eyes, literally walked away, and I just sat there watching those ballots. I was not going to let those out of my sight. Me and another gal named Lori. There was a gal named Gloria. There was an elderly guy that I think had COPD because I brought him his oxygen and helped him out there. We sat there and watched those paper ballots to be sure they were secure until those numbered tag locks could come. So we waited about 20 minutes and they still hadn't come. So I flagged down our supervisor again and said, hey, is somebody bringing those tab locks? And she said,
Ms. Smith, can you wrap it up?
Yep.
We got a lot.
Okay, so she said, we don't need them. And I said, I'm not leaving here until you bring them. So finally, after my second request, they brought the numbered tab locks. And so I asked where the chain of custody forms were, and she said they didn't have any. And I said, it does no good to lock them without a chain of custody form. And she refused to do a chain of custody form and demanded that we throw them in her car. And that's when I took the pictures to document the numbers protecting those paper ballots. In my job as a nurse, if you send a urine drug screen to the lab and it's all sealed up but you have no chain of custody form, they throw it away because the chain of custody form is what proves it hasn't been tampered with. Those bags left that place with the tags I pitched a fit on about and took pictures of, but no chain of custody form. I had no idea what would happen to them after they left that place. I followed the supervisor and her friend, and the sheriff made sure the bags got into the election office, went home, couldn't sleep. Well, I went actually to our poll worker who'd been kicked out's house, had a sleepless night. The next day, I went to the local election office and met with our local election authorities. They wouldn't listen. I gave them pictures of the tab locks, asked them could we at least look at them and make sure they're still sealed and do a chain of custody form. They refused. He told me, Gary Hamilton, my commissioner on the election board, said it wouldn't matter if a couple 100 ballots went missing. That was the response from my local election office. And so here I knew that we had these unsecured. All our paper ballots were completely unsecured. Less secure than someone's urine drug screen, right? So then on the Friday, the 13th, when we go to do our initial count of the paper ballots, guess what? They come out of the back room in cardboard boxes, not in the bags I sealed on election night. And there's no chain of custody form. There is no documentation of what happened to those people's ballots between when I locked them up election night and when they walked out in cardboard boxes. I had to bite my tongue because I was a poll watcher and I couldn't take pictures, but there's a whole room full of people who could corroborate that they came out in cardboard boxes, not in those canvas bags. Now you tell me why they all cheered when the paper ballot count matched the machine count. It means nothing when you count paper ballots that have been handled, removed from their sealed containers, and no documentation of what happened to them in between. Counting paper ballots means zip, nothing, absolutely nothing. And it's infuriating, and I can't believe it happened.
Thank you. Thank you. Do you have any questions? Thank you very much.
Senator Jordan. Just a second.
Oh, one other point. I also counted the absentee. I watched for counting the absentee ballots, and one of the workers asked how they verify the signatures, and a little old lady stood up and said, "Oh, I verified 90% of them." One lady, one little old lady, looks at all those absentee ballots and decides whose signature stays and whose signature goes. You tell me what oversight and verification process that is. I'm sorry.
I think you had a question, Senator George.
Yeah, just a quick question. And so you were a poll worker in Hart County, Georgia?
Correct.
And with respect to the ultimate count there, isn't it true that President Trump won that county 9,465 votes to 3,100
It is,
approximately?
which is remarkable. So the Trump team is willing to listen to me, someone who lives in a county where Trump won by a landslide, because I want to tell you, I don't give a rip who won. What matters to me is that the people's vote is more protected than their urine. Think about it. It doesn't matter who won. Those paper ballots were not secure. I don't care if you're a Democrat, a Republican. I don't care if you voted for Minnie Mouse. I don't care. The process is flawed when your urine is more protected than your vote. And that is what happened. And that's why I'm here, because you need to fix the holes that jeopardize every single person sitting in this chair. I don't care who they voted for. Those voters, I saw a woman lead her blind husband in to vote. I saw a man pull up in a big van and come out in his electric wheelchair to vote. Those are my voters. It's my job to protect their vote. It's your job as legislators to ensure that there are safeguards for their votes, and that when the law is broken and people don't follow the law, you're supposed to make sure that they do. That's your job. And it's not just my vote, it's yours too. Think about it. Your vote might not have counted either. Not a single person in this room. You don't know. You weren't there. I was there. I thank you for your time, and I hope you'll take what these people are telling you seriously. It's important. The people's voice matters in this country.
It does. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being willing to work and give your time.
Thank you.
To work to protect the vote. Okay.
We have one short witness if you want before you take a break.
That would be fine.
Yeah.
Yes.
Grace Lemon.
Yeah, if you would tell us a little bit your name and where you live, and then tell us what you wanted to hear.
Okay, so my name's Grace. I'm 22 years old. I'm a senior at University of Georgia, and I live in Fulton County. Okay. So I came here to tell y'all my experience when I went and voted in person.
Okay, go ahead.
So I went and I voted in person on October 23rd with my younger sister, who was a first-time voter. And when I went to check in and give them my license and verify my identity to get my voter card, I was told that there was an absentee ballot already out for me. But I never requested one. I've never voted absentee. I always go vote in person. And I had to sign an affidavit saying that I did not request an absentee ballot. So I got my voter card, I voted in person, everything went fine after that. The next day, my mom called the voter center and was told that somebody voted absentee in my name on October 7th. We don't know who that is, and we haven't gotten any answers about that since. And on October 28th, I filled out an open records request for the Fulton County Voter's Office. I received an email from Fulton County Registration Chief, Mr. Ralph Jones, and I called him. He asked about my experience, and he told me he was going to further investigate the situation and get back to me with more answers. November 3rd, his assistant, Mariska Bodison, emailed me to say that my request was given to the Secretary of State's office for further investigation. I haven't heard anything else from either of them. Then I got an email from my dad's friend and lawyer, Mr. Bob Cheely. I spoke with Mr. Cheely on November 19th on the phone, and he wanted to know how the investigation was going. And I didn't know, so I tried to call around to find out more answers for him. And I couldn't get anyone on the phone. Once I did, in the Secretary of State's office, nobody had any answers for me. They hadn't seen my open records request, and they had no answers about how the investigation was going. Later, I spoke with Sharon Griffin in the elections office at the Secretary of State, but she couldn't tell me anything either. I never got another call back, and at this point, I was knowing that I was getting the runaround from everybody. November 23rd, I received an email that my open records request was never received by the Secretary of State's office and was asked to submit another one on their website. And I did so and emailed the officer back and told him that I did. There was no name attached to that email. It was just open records officer. On November 30th, I received another email from the open records officer in the Secretary of State's office to file a complaint. The last line of this email read, "This will serve as the final response to this request, and your request is now closed." We tried to call the Secretary of State's office again and couldn't get anybody on the phone. So I am left with still no answers. No one will answer the phone or call me back. And I want to know ultimately if my vote was counted or if the vote that was voted for me scratched my vote out.
That's a good. Thank you. Wow. Senator Dolezal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. Can you tell me your name again?
I'm Grace.
Grace, thanks for being here, Grace.
Thank you.
Can you clarify for me what happened? And I don't think I caught it. Were you able to vote in person?
Yes, sir.
Was it a provisional ballot or was it a regular ballot as far as you know your vote was counted?
As far as I know, it was a regular ballot.
Thank you. Did you have the opportunity to go onto the My Voter page to see when you allegedly requested your absentee ballot, when you allegedly voted by absentee? Have you had a chance to do that yet?
No, sir, I haven't gotten anything. When my mom called the voter center, she was told by someone on the phone that an absentee ballot was cast in my name on October 7th.
Great. Maybe, I think we're going to have a break, Mr. Chairman. I'd love to plug your information in here. I don't want you to announce your date of birth to the world, but you can come enter it here. I'd like to see this because you are not the first person that we have heard of that has had this happen. And this, to me, is probably some of the most discouraging testimony.
Yes, sir.
This is probably your first or second presidential election you've had the opportunity to vote in, depending on when your birthday is.
Yes, sir.
We're going to get this right.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And we need to figure this out, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Senator Jordan.
Number 7. When you went and they said you've requested an absentee ballot, of course you didn't have it with you. Did you have to execute an affidavit saying?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and then they gave you a card and you were able to vote on the machine, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then in terms of when did you vote? When did you go vote?
October 23rd.
Okay. Yeah, I concur with Senator Dolezal that I think we need to check your My Voter stuff and,
yes, ma'am,
and try to figure out what happened here.
Thank you. Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, we will take a 15-minute break. We've been going for a long time, and we will reconvene at, 4:45? Yeah, 4:45. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I told them I was going to spend my 15-minute break sitting down, not standing up.